Chapter 1873 The Law of the Jungle. When the light finally faded from view, Zhongxian found that he was already standing behind a boulder. As soon as he regained his balance, he felt a chilling intent moving along the ground, dashing right toward the jade token in front of his chest. If the strike landed, he would be eliminated right away. This examination was indeed advantageous toward those who entered the mountain early. Those who had arrived earlier were already lying in ambush, waiting to spring upon those who walked into their trap. Not bad. You are quite fast. Zhongxian chuckled as his fingers darted forward in retaliation. Wang. The weapon that was surging in his direction was held firmly on the spot, unable to advance any further on him. Even though Zhongxian had limited his strength to the level of a Saint 9 Dan cultivator, his eye of discernment and reaction speed were more than enough to make him a match for great sage cultivators. Considering how his assailant was only an ordinary macrocosm ascendancy realm cultivator, there was no way his ambush could possibly succeed. Having blocked the assault, Zhongxian took a good look at his assailant. It was a young man dressed in black. A hint of horror could be seen reflected in the depths of the young man's eyes upon seeing how Zhongxian caught his dagger so easily. Knowing that he was outmatched, the young man decisively abandoned his dagger and turned tail. It was a wise move on the young man's part. Had it been any other competitor, his decisiveness would have ensured his survival. I have to say that you are very sharp on your feet. It's only unfortunate that you chose me as your opponent. Zhongxian nodded in approval as he lifted his finger and tapped it lightly in the air. Freeze. Voila. As if the air had frozen over, the young man found himself standing completely still on the spot, unable to move at all. This is a spatial seal. The young man cried in fright. For a Saint 9 Dan cultivator to actually comprehend such an ability, this meant that the young man before him was ranked amid the top among the descendants of the 72 Seiji. How could he have been so unlucky as to meet such a powerful foe at the very start of the examination? Friend, I apologize for my brash actions. I was truly foolish to have dared make a move on you. Please be so magnanimous as to spare me. The young man begged desperately for mercy. He boasted the greatest fighting prowess among his peers in his clan. He had thought that as long as he prepared himself well, he would be able to hunt down others with ease. However, who could have known that his first target would end up being this ridiculously powerful expert? If only he had known earlier, he would have surely snuggled up tightly in his hiding position. He wouldn't have courted his own death. It's not entirely impossible for me to spare you, Zhongxian remarked as he looked at the young man before him purposefully. Please speak of any conditions you have for me. Understanding the intention behind Zhongxian's gaze, the young man gritted his teeth. I am willing to offer up my possessions in exchange for your mercy. However, you should also be aware that the resources that each clan passes down to us are limited, so I don't have too many good items. I don't need your possessions. You have two choices in front of you. You can either have your jade token destroyed and be eliminated, or you can tell me what I want to know, Zhongxian said as he gazed deeply at the young man. Rest assured, I won't probe into the secrets of your clan and put you in a tight spot. I'll choose the second, the young man replied decisively. Only he knew how much effort he had put in to get so far. If he failed to get into the great frontistery of Confucianism, all of the resources that he had been entitled to would come to a halt, making it impossible for him to advance any further in the future. No matter what, he could not allow himself to be eliminated there. Wonderful, Zhongxian remarked nonchalantly as he placed his hands behind his back. From the moment you started cultivating, how did you climb to the current stage you are at? I want you to describe every single thing in detail, be it the trials or examinations you have been through. Etcher. The young man had been wondering what Zhongxian would ask him, but it turned out to be something that practically everyone knew about. Even though he was bewildered by the question, he still answered it honestly. I have been through 27 exams so far, roughly 1 or 2 every single year. In every single examination, I saw many of my peers getting eliminated, thus having whatever resources they had been entitled to completely cut off. Instead, they are entrusted with the responsibilities of managing the clan's businesses instead. It did not take long for the young man to go through his entire story. Find authorized novels in webnovel faster updates. Better experience. Please click for visiting. As Zhongxian listened to the young man, a frown slowly etched its way between his brows. Just as he had guessed, it seemed like competition was an integral part of the life of the 100 schools of philosophers. From the moment they started cultivating, they were put through trial after trial. They would be entitled to more cultivation techniques and resources if they cleared the trial, but if they failed, they would be stripped of their right to cultivate. This was no longer nurturing the young, it was practically nurturing GU. It was rumored that those who nurtured GU would toss thousands of poisonous creatures together into a jar and have them kill one another. The one to emerge victorious at the end of it all would be the strongest GU of all. This seemed to be the same method that the 100 schools of philosophers were employing as well. Those who were given the opportunity to participate in the examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism had to go through many trials and rise above all of their peers in order to come this far. It was no wonder all of them emanated such feral auras, reminiscent of the combat masters. Only those who had the most tenacious drive of all could possibly survive under such conditions. Perhaps this was also why Yang Shui and the others had no qualms about collaborating with the otherworldly demons. To them, results were the most important of all. As long as they achieved what they aimed for, the means were not important at all. It seems like the 100 schools of philosophers have created an environment that promotes the survival of the fittest, Zhongxian thought as he looked at the young man once more. You said earlier that the resources you are given from your clan is limited. What does that mean? As an offspring of a major clan, do you not know that? The young man asked incredulously. However, knowing that his future was in the other party's hand, he could only answer obediently. Depending on one's level of cultivation and the examinations one has passed, the amount of resources that one is entitled to is fixed. Based on what I know, it's the same for all clans. There is no exception at all. Zhongxian gasped in shock. It felt like he had suddenly gotten a glimpse into how the 100 schools of philosophers operated. At the very start, they would choose the offspring that showed some aptitude toward cultivation and groom them. At fixed intervals, those who failed to advance beyond a certain level would be eliminated, thus losing their right to access cultivation resources and cultivation techniques. Other than that, there would also be all kinds of competitions and trials that they would have to overcome. If they wished to continue cultivating, the only thing they could do was charge ahead as desperately as they could in order to ensure that they would not lag behind. It could be said that the resources in this world were controlled to a degree so precise that it could make one shudder in fear. Can't one venture into ancient domains or the like in order to obtain cultivation resources and cultivation techniques? Zhongxian asked. Most cultivators on the master-teacher continent did not have too many resources either. However, through trading or venturing into ancient domains and finding treasures, they would be able to gather the resources required for them to continue cultivating for quite a while. So, why could the population here not do the same? There was no way they had not thought of such a thing. How could there be any ancient domains around? After a cultivator dies, all of the resources he has been given are taken back by their respective clan. Even if you kill me right now, you won't be able to take my resources because every single item I have brought with me has been logged in my clan's logistics records. If there's anything missing, my clan will make an official visit to your clan and demand the return of the missing resources, the young man said. Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Just what in the world was the 100 schools of philosophers up to? Why in the world would they go to such extreme lengths to control the circulation of resources in the Kungsu domain? Was this dimension in such a dire shortage of resources? After asking a few more questions to clarify the matter, Zhongxian flicked his finger lightly at the young man. Who? The young man collapsed to the ground. You will regain your consciousness after I leave, but you won't remember meeting me and everything that has happened afterward, Zhongxian whispered softly before leaving the area. Memories were stored in the soul, and given Zhongxian's prowess in soul arts, it was not too difficult for him to isolate a specific memory and wipe it away. Even though the questions that he had asked were insignificant in nature, it was likely that it could bring some trouble to Fan Xiaoshu in the future. Since that was the case, he should stem any potential problems at the roots. Chapter 1874 Fan Xiaofeng Spiritual Perception. After parting from the young man, Zhongxian walked a distance away before releasing his spiritual perception. In an instant, he gained an overview of the entire mountain. In truth, there were formations in place that prevented the examinees from using their spiritual perception. However, through exploiting the flaws of the formation and his superior strength, he was able to use his spiritual perception without catching anyone's notice. Soon, he found the trails of the two youths that he was looking for. Oh! Fan Xiaoxing is quite lucky, isn't he? He was teleported in the midst of a mountain stream, so as long as he hides there, he should be able to avoid the attention of others for quite some time. Ah, did Fan Xiaoxing take up all of the luck? The three examinees from ancient sage Zikai's lineage were Fan Xiaoxu, Fan Xiaoxing, and Fan Xiaofeng. Fan Xiaoxing had managed to hide himself well, so no one had noticed him thus far. On the other hand, Fan Xiaofeng was in a precarious position. There were two powerful candidates chasing after him. It was fortunate that Fan Xiaofeng was extremely nimble, or else his jade token would have already been shattered. Thus, Zhongxian began flitting in the direction of Fan Xiaofeng. He knew that there was an enforcement squad constantly keeping track of his movements, so he made sure to maintain his speed at St. Ninden Pinnacle. Woo! While he was traveling, he could sense shockwaves rippling all around him. The competition among the examinees was really not to be underestimated. It was no exaggeration to say that multiple battles had been ongoing every second since the start of the examination, and the examinees were swiftly being eliminated one after another. The examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism was truly cruel. It was true that the rules permitted the examinees to form alliances, but in the face of limited slots, all alliances were transient. The moment a person lowered their guard, a dagger would be plunged into their back. From the start of the examination, Zhongxian had already caught sight of such occurrences several times. Three examinees were working in coordination with one another to corner a cultivator traveling alone, but in the midst of the battle, one of the three examinees working together let his guard down for a moment and ended up getting injured. At the end of the battle, his teammate suddenly turned against him and eliminated him as well. In this examination, sustaining injuries was extremely dangerous. Not only did it cause a decline in one's fighting prowess, it was also a sign of weakness for other examinees to exploit. As such, being in an alliance might not necessarily be a good thing for this examination. While Zhongxian was dashing ahead, Fan Xiaofeng was trembling non-stop as cold sweat trickled down his head. Under the simultaneous assault of three examinees, he had already sustained significant injuries. With half of his energy expended, exhaustion was starting to seep into his body. Why struggle so hard? Just obediently accept your elimination, and all of your suffering will be over. You should have known from the start that the great frontistery of Confucianism is not a place that someone of your caliber can possibly enter. One of the youths scoffed with the confidence of a hunter cornering a prey. The other two youths behind him encircled Fan Xiaofeng in a fan-shaped formation. Do your best to eliminate me then. Even if I can't enter the great frontistery of Confucianism, I'll make sure to bring you down together with me. Knowing that there was no escape for him, Fan Xiaofeng gritted his teeth furiously as he glared at the trio before him. His luck was really horrible. As soon as he entered the mountain, he had been teleported right into the middle of these three. It had really taken his all to survive for so long. Ha ha ha. You're going to bring us down together with you? That must be the greatest joke of the century. The youth leading the team of three harumphed disdainfully. Get him. Voila. Hearing the signal to attack, the three of them dashed forward and rained blows down upon Fan Xiaofeng. Their attacks covered all directions, making it impossible for the latter to escape. The youth leading the team had already reached Half-Great Sage, whereas the other two were at St. Ninden Pinnacle. Fan Xiaofeng would have struggled against any one of them, let alone the three of them simultaneously. He flew into a fluster right from the start. Peng! A powerful blow sent him crashing heavily into a boulder behind him. Completely sapped, his body slumped to the ground as if a pile of loose mud. Seeing that Fan Xiaofeng was already powerless to retaliate, the youth leading the team told the other two youths beside him, "Let's not waste any more time. Quickly crush his jade token, and we'll start finding our next prey." Yes. The youth on the left chuckled softly as he leaped up to Fan Xiaofeng and darted his finger toward the jade token in front of the latter's chest. If the attack landed, there was no doubt that Fan Xiaofeng would be eliminated. It seems like I'm going to have to let down the expectations of the clan. With a despaired look on his face, Fan Xiaofeng knew that there was no way he would be able to make a comeback. Thus, he closed his eyes helplessly and accepted his fate. However, as time ticked by, the jade token in front of his chest failed to shatter. Opening his eyes once more, he saw a figure sitting on a boulder not too far away. That figure was shaking his right leg casually as he looked in their direction with a trace of a smile on his face. Are the three of you proud of yourselves for ganging up on a lad? Xiaoshu. Fan Xiaofeng's heart jolted upon hearing that voice. It was none other than the son of the clan head, Fan Xiaoshu. The other party had arrived at this crucial moment to save him. Another person who has come to court his death, eh? Seeing how the newly arrived young man dared to provoke them, the youth leading the team sneered coldly. He gestured at the other two youths with a tilt of his chin, and they swiftly surrounded Zhongxian. You should see for yourself how proud we are of ourselves. Hula. Knowing that time was precious, such that every single second that they remained in the open would spell a greater risk for them, the three of them charged right at Zhongxian. Seeing that the three of them had turned their sights to the son of the clan head, Fan Xiaofeng exclaimed in a panic, Xiaoshu, hurry up and run away. At the very least, one of us has to clear the examination. You don't have to care about me. He knew that Xiaoshu was only slightly stronger than him, so there was no chance that the latter could defeat the three standing before him. Rather than getting eliminated just like that, the latter would be better off escaping. At the very least, there would still be a ray of hope for their lineage. Peng peng peng. However, before Fan Xiaofeng could finish his words, the sound of fists and kicks plunging into flesh echoed resoundingly in the air. Watching as everything unfolded before his eyes, the words that he had sought to say suddenly caught in his throat, causing his words to come to an abrupt halt. Contrary to expectations, the trio who had still been standing smugly a moment ago were floored with horror reflected in their eyes. Meanwhile, Fan Xiaoshu was still sitting on the boulder, not seeming to have moved at all. The other party looked at him with an encouraging smile and said, You should eliminate them yourself. Me? Fan Xiaofeng was taken aback by those words. Up till this moment, he had been unable to make sense of how the Xiaoshu that he knew was able to defeat those three so easily. His mind was so caught up in that matter that he was unable to process anything else. Weren't they trying to eliminate you a moment ago? Since that's the case, it's only right for you to return the favor to them, Zhongxian replied. It was already an act of bullying for him to make a move on those three. He would feel too ashamed of himself if he really eliminated them on top of that. No matter what, he still wanted to retain as much of his dignity as possible. But I am not a match for them, Fan Xiaofeng cried with a reddened face. While the three of them had sustained injuries in the earlier clash with Fan Xiaoshu, his injuries were not light either. As much as he wanted to eliminate the three of them, he knew that the current him did not have the ability to do so. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Rest assured. These three lads are nothing at all. Follow my instructions, and you will be able to defeat them with ease, Zhongxian replied encouragingly. Defeat them with ease? Me? Fan Xiaofeng was a little hesitant, but it seemed like the idea had struck a chord in his heart. He gritted his teeth and replied, All right, I'll give it a try. In any case, Fan Xiaoshu was already there, and based on the current situation, it seemed like he was already in a safe position. Thus, there was nothing for him to worry about even if he did lose the battle. You aren't going to make a move? The youth leading the team eyed Zhongxian warily with fear in his eyes. The other party had defeated the three of them in a single move. In terms of strength, there was probably no one who could stand against him among the younger generation. Fighting against such an opponent would surely spell their defeat. However, if their opponent was just the fellow whom they had chased earlier, it should not be too difficult for them to claim victory. I won't make a move, so feel free to use whatever you have at your disposal. If you are able to defeat him, I'll let the three of you go. Otherwise, I guess the three of you will just have to end your cultivation journey here. Zhongxian replied coolly. Hearing those words, Fan Xiaofeng nearly keeled over. Xiaoshu, are you out of your mind? Chapter 1875. Yang Yixiao. Fan Xiaofeng had thought that Fan Xiaoshu was trying to train him, and if he reached his limits, the other party would step in and save him. Yet, contrary to his expectations, Fan Xiaoshu was actually saying that he would not interfere in the fight, and he would even let the three of them off if they could defeat him. How in the world could he possibly defeat the three of them together in a real fight? It would already be a blessing if he was not beaten to death. He had thought that Fan Xiaoshu was here to save him, but it felt like the latter had just dug a humongous pit for him to leap into. With a conflicted look on his face, Fan Xiaofeng looked as if he was on the verge of tears. Seeing the "this is the end" look on Fan Xiaofeng's face, Zhong Xian could not help but chuckle a little. Cut your hesitation and do as I say. As long as you follow my instructions, you'll surely be able to win the battle. Otherwise, don't blame me for not helping you if you get eliminated. It would take a miracle for Fan Xiaofeng to lose as long as the other party heeded his guidance. All right then. Seeing that Fan Xiaoshu was not joking around, Fan Xiaofeng cursed the other party countless times in his heart before taking in a deep breath and rising to his feet somberly. The worst that could happen was his elimination anyway. He would just have to make sure to recount everything that had happened here to the clan head when he returned. On the other hand, the group of three had realized the disparity between their strength and Zhong Xian's, and they knew that it would be impossible to escape from the other party. Thus, they exchanged glances before turning to glare at Fan Xiaofeng coldly. Who? The three of them made a move simultaneously, raising powerful gales in the area. 6 arms flashed across the air swiftly in the blink of an eye. Every single one of these arms carried the devastating might of lightning, sealing off every possible path that Feng Xiaoshu could possibly escape to. Is this the end? Fan Xiaofeng felt his blood turning cold. Previously, he had thought that the worst that could happen was for him to sustain severe injuries, but from the looks of it, even surviving would be a luxury. Just when he was about to resolve himself to his death, a voice suddenly echoed in his ears. Follow my orders. Use the third form of the paste gate movement technique together with the fifth move of enlightenment palm and the second form of 7 aperture fist. Fan Xiaofeng immediately recognized that voice to be from Fan Xiaoshu. While he had no idea why the other party wanted him to execute those moves, he knew that he had no other choice but to follow the other party's instructions at this point in time. Thus, he gritted his teeth as he thought, I'll pit my life against them. To be able to survive the harsh trials of the Fan clan and advance so far step by step, the tenacity that drove him was not something that ordinary people could possibly imagine. All it took was the blink of an eye for his heart to settle down. He swiftly went through the 3 battle techniques through his mind before his body moved fluidly to execute them like flowing water. Who? The third form of the paste gate movement technique brought him into the blind spot of the coordination of the trio, and executing the enlightenment palm with his left palm and the 7 aperture fist with his right fist, he struck the chest of 2 of the youths. Peng! Peng! The jade tokens in front of their chests shattered, and with looks of disbelief on the faces of the 2 youths, they were swallowed by an outburst of light and vanished. This. Fan Xiaofeng was taken aback by what he had just done. He lowered his gaze to look at his hands in bewilderment, almost as if he was staring at a monster. Following Fan Xiaoshu's orders had actually allowed him to overcome the encirclement with a single move, and he had even managed to eliminate 2 of them so easily. When in the world had he become so formidable? Why you? Seeing how 2 of his comrades had vanished in an instant, the youth leading the group backed away with a fearful look on his face. Be it in terms of the sharpness of the movements, the grasp of timing, or his reaction speed, Fan Xiaofeng's earlier maneuver was so ingenious that it almost felt like an art form. If not, there was no way the other party could have eliminated 2 of them within such a short period of time. This was a remarkable feat that he knew he would never be able to pull off in his current state. Just 10 breaths ago, Fan Xiaofeng had been in their grasp, but in the blink of an eye, the tables had turned on them. Was this all because he was following that young man's instructions? The youth could not help but turn to look at the young man sitting on the boulder not too far away as shock crashed down on his mind like a roaring tsunami. Even a casual pointer from him was able to induce such a massive improvement in Fan Xiaofeng within a short period of time. Just how freaking powerful must that young man be? Eliminate him too, Zhong Xian instructed. Yes. If Fan Xiaofeng had still harbored some doubts before, at that very moment, there was nothing but admiration left at the bottom of his heart. He charged forward in agitation and thrust his palm down on the final remaining youth. Just like that, the two of them started exchanging blows with one another. This time, Zhong Xian did not give direct instructions to Fan Xiaofeng. Instead, what he did was decipher the other party's move in detail to the latter, granting the latter the freedom to choose what kind of moves he should use to counterattack. Initially, Fan Xiaofeng's movements were still a little flustered as his thoughts struggled to keep up with the flow of battle. However, by the 20th blow, he had already grown accustomed to the tempo, and before long, he was able to fend off the other party's attacks with minimal effort. The youth who had cornered him earlier was no longer a match for him. Peng peng peng. With a powerful thrust of his finger, Fan Xiaofeng shattered the youth's jade token. He saw an indignant look on the youth's face before the latter's silhouette was completely enveloped within a brilliant outburst of light and vanished from view. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Xiaoshu. Fan Xiaofeng could hardly believe that he had actually managed to defeat a half-great sage cultivator with his own strength. He turned to look at Fan Xiaoshu with awe in his eyes. No wonder Fan Xiaoshu had told them to wait for him to come look for them. Who could have known that he would have grown so powerful over the course of a few days? Just as Fan Xiaofeng was about to express his gratitude to the young man sitting on the boulder, the other party suddenly turned to look at the mountain stream not too far away and waved his hand leisurely. Haven't you watched long enough? Don't you think it's about time for you to come out? Pa pa pa. Resounding applause echoed in the area as 7 silhouettes emerged from the shadows from the mountain stream. Upon seeing this sight, Fan Xiaofeng's heart skipped a beat. He had actually failed to realize that there were so many people hiding in his vicinity. Furthermore, from the looks of it, they were already allied with one another. It suddenly dawned on him why Fan Xiaoshu had not made a move all along. It was likely that the other party had noticed that there were others hiding in the area, so he was keeping a close eye on them in case they made a move. I have to say, Fan Xiaoshu, you sure have improved quite a lot from back then. You were actually able to allow this ordinary fellow to defeat 3 men simultaneously with just a couple of pointers. With your current strength, you are qualified to join our team, the white-robed young man standing at the forefront of the 7 youths said. He was also the one who had applauded earlier. He is a descendant of ancient sage Zi Yuan, Yang Yixiao. Upon taking a closer look at the white-robed young man's appearance, Fan Xiaofeng suddenly felt as if someone had gripped his heart tightly. He's the strongest person in this entire examination. There's no one on this mountain who is a match for him. Most clans would make sure to gather some intelligence about the examinees challenging the great frontistery of Confucianism's examination each year so that their own people would have a clearer idea who their competitors were. If there was anyone among the 2,000 examinees whom everyone hoped to avoid, it was none other than the white-robed young man standing before them, Yang Yixiao. Ancient sage Zi Yuan was the first senior of Kongsha's 72 sages, such that even ancient sage Ran Qiu, who boasted the greatest fighting prowess of them all, dared not go against his words. And the person standing before them, Yang Yixiao, was ancient sage Zi Yuan's descendant. Due to the incredible capabilities that he wielded, Yang Yixiao's fame had reached even the ears of the older generations. It was truly the worst of luck for them to encounter him here. You want me to join your team? Zhong Xian did not appear to be astonished in the least by this turn of events. He simply looked at Yang Yixiao with casual nonchalance in his eyes, seemingly unfazed by Yang Yixiao's appearance and his offer. Indeed. Those behind me are those whom I have acknowledged, and you have also caught my eye. Join my team, and let's eliminate the other examinees together. Yang Yixiao placed his hands in the back and spoke with a light chuckle. His voice carried a domineering edge that left no room for negotiation at all. Pardon me, but the notion of me catching your eye sends shudders down my spine, and I am not interested in joining your team, Zhong Xian declined curtly. He did not expect the other party to be so narcissistic, so he could not be bothered to put up a front to gently reject the other party. Seeing the airs that Zhong Xian was putting on, One of the youths standing behind Yang Yixiao could stand it no longer and furiously bellowed, "It's your honor that Brother Yang invited you to join our group, you arrogant prat. Don't think that you are something huge just because you aren't utterly useless. As long as we wish to, we can eliminate you right now and strip you of your opportunity to continue cultivating." Chapter 1876. The Enforcement Squad. Qin Xiao was a descendant of ancient sage Zi Pai, and he had already reached St. Ninden Pinnacle a year ago. With his abilities, he was confident that he would be able to clear the examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism with ease, but contrary to his expectations, the format chosen for this year turned out to be a free-for-all elimination round. If it had been the usual round-robin tournament, he was certain that he could have gotten into the top 100. However, when it came to a free-for-all elimination round, there were simply too many variables involved for him to guarantee his victory. Nevertheless, he felt that it should not be too difficult to him to get into the final 100 survivors as long as he moved carefully. Unfortunately, it seemed like Lady Luck was not on his side. Shortly after he entered the examination grounds, he had encountered the strongest competitor in the entire examination, Yang Yixiao. Before he knew it, he had already been eliminated. At the perimeter of the mountain, one of the middle-aged men who had been standing together with Nangong Yuanfeng earlier walked up to Qin Xiao and said, "Yang Yixiao is the strongest expert in this examination. You need not feel too bad about losing to him. He was from the lineage of ancient sage Ran Yong, Ran Fei. All of those who had been eliminated would be teleported right to this location." In order to ensure that everything proceeded smoothly, the scholastic masters of the great frontistery of Confucianism were able to peer into whatever was happening within the mountain in real time. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience. Please click for visiting. I know that losing to him was inevitable, but I feel so indignant inside. Qin Xiao clenched his fists tightly in frustration. He knew that there was no way that he could have triumphed over Yang Yixiao. The disparity in their strength was simply too great. Nevertheless, it was still an awful feeling to be eliminated as soon as he stepped onto the examination grounds. Yang Yixiao is Yang Shui's younger brother, and he has received the latter's guidance. Of the 2,000 examinees gathered here, there are some who have reached Great Sage Wunden introspective convalescence realm, but even they would face difficulty dealing with Yang Yixiao, let alone you. Scholastic Master Ran Fei consoled with a smile. If nothing goes wrong, it's likely that he'll emerge with the highest results in this examination. Ensuring that one was able to squeeze into the ranks of the last 100 survivors was just the prerequisite to entering the great frontistery of Confucianism. As for the ranking of the last 100 survivors, it would be determined by how many people they had eliminated over the course of the examination. Yang Yixiao's fighting prowess could be said to be the unrivaled among the 2,000 examinees, and to make matters worse, he had teamed up with 6 other top-notch experts. Anyone who was unlucky enough to encounter his team was bound to be eliminated. There was no other way around it. Ancient sage Zi Yuan's lineage has always produced generation after generation of experts. I guess this is something that can't be helped. As much as Qin Xiao was unwilling to face his defeat, he had no choice but to grudgingly accept it. All of a sudden, there was radiant burst of light in front of Qin Xiao. Putong. A silhouette crashed onto the ground not too far away. Seeing the fellow who had just been teleported here, Qin Xiao widened his eyes in astonishment. Isn't that the descendant of ancient sage Zi Heng, Shi Yuan? He is in Yang Yixiao's team, right? After all, he was the one who eliminated me earlier. As one of the 7 people in Yang Yixiao's team, how in the world did he get eliminated? Who in the world would dare make a move on Yang Yixiao's team, or could it be internal conflict? Putong. In his moment of shock, a blur flashed across Qin Xiao's eyes as another silhouette fell to the ground. He was also from Yang Yixiao's team. Putong. 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 Following which, another 4 people fell to the ground with awkward looks on their faces. Aren't all of them? Qin Xiao was stunned by what he was seeing. They were all familiar faces. They had all been with Yang Yixiao when he was eliminated earlier on. How in the world did all of them get eliminated one after another in quick succession? Did Yang Yixiao make a move on them, or did they encounter some kind of formidable expert? Unable to curb his intrigue, Qin Xiao rushed forward and asked, "You lot, what?" But before he could finish his words, another silhouette fell to the ground. Putong. When Qin Xiao got a close look at the other party's appearance, he froze on the spot, petrified. Even Ran Fei staggered weakly and nearly tripped over his own leg. The person who had just been eliminated was none other than the examinee whom he had just confidently declared would be the champion of this examination. Yang Yixiao. Yang Yixiao struggled up from the ground as he glared at the mountain peak with inferno burning in his eyes. Unable to suppress the fury burning in his chest, he roared, "Fan Xiaoshu, this isn't over yet." This was the worst humiliation that he had ever suffered. He was an introspective convalescence realm expert, and many viewed him as the strongest contender for the champion seat. He had thought that it was finally time for him to showcase his prowess and dominate the examination, but who could have known that Fan Xiaoshu would grab him by his neck and throw him out, as if dealing with a little chick. To make things worse, he had found himself completely unable to retaliate. This was a stain that he would never be able to wash away in his life. He quickly looked around him, and upon seeing Scholastic Master Ran Fei, he walked up to the latter, clasped his fist, and reported, "Ran Fei Laosha, I suspect that Fan Xiaoshu from ancient sage Zikai's lineage is cheating. I implore the enforcement squad to head over and investigate him." Cheating? That's right. I met Fan Xiaoshu half a year ago, and while he wasn't weak, he was still nowhere close to being a match for me back then. Yet, he actually managed to defeat me with the utmost ease earlier. Yang Yixiao clenched his jaws and spat. "I see." Scholastic Master Ran Fei nodded. "I'll inform the enforcement squad to investigate the matter." He had no idea how Fan Xiaoshu could be cheating, but since someone had reported the claim, not to mention that the someone was the strongest contender for the champion seat, it was his responsibility to look into the matter. Thus, he took out his communication jade token and passed down a series of instructions. Following which, he turned his gaze back to Yang Yixiao and reassured, "Don't worry. If Fan Xiaoshu is truly cheating, we will surely be able to find something. We have eyes all over the mountain, so there's nothing he can do that can escape our notice." Given the significance of this examination, cheating was strictly prohibited. Of course, if Fan Xiaoshu had truly defeated Yang Yixiao with his own strength, there was nothing that could be done. Yang Yixiao heaved a sigh of relief. "You mentioned earlier that you were eliminated by Fan Xiaoshu, right? May I ask how many people he has rallied to his side to be able to defeat so many of you at once?" Scholastic Master Ran Fei asked. In his view, it was likely that Fan Xiaoshu had managed to gather many experts to his side. After all, such actions were explicitly mentioned to be allowed in the examination. If that was not the case, it meant that Fan Xiaoshu had single-handedly overcome the collaboration of all 7 of them, which was, of course, a ridiculous notion. Even great sage Tudan experts would be unable to pull something like that off. That question jolted Yang Yixiao's memory of what had happened earlier, and his cheeks began twitching intensely. He was alone. There was another person that was with him, but that person didn't make a move at all. "Are you telling me that he single-handedly defeated all of you?" Scholastic Master Ran Fei was dumbstruck. "Was it a one-on-one?" "No, that's not it. We attacked him together in order to save time." Yang Yixiao's face turned even redder. It was in view of the prowess that Fan Xiaoshu had displayed that he wanted to invite the other party into his team. Yet, the other party had simply snubbed his invitation, and that had really infuriated him. Thus, he had ordered the entire team to attack Fan Xiaoshu together. Who would have thought that despite the experts that he had rallied to his side, none of them were able to withstand even a single blow from Fan Xiaoshu? So, despite challenging him as a team, you still ended up getting eliminated by him alone? Scholastic Master Ran Fei widened his eyes, unable to believe what he had just heard. Yang Yixiao was reluctant to say it out loud, so he nodded discreetly in response. This. Scholastic Master Ran Fei was so shocked that he could not even close his mouth anymore. To be able to defeat so many experts single-handedly, could it be that Fan Xiaoshu's cultivation had already reached Great Sage Tudan Great Philosopher realm? But it should not be possible for anyone to reach that cultivation realm prior to entering the great frontistery of Confucianism. Shocked, Scholastic Master Ran Fei was about to probe deeper when there was another burst of light, and another group of fellows rained onto the ground. Putong! Putong! It's the enforcement squad. Isn't the enforcement squad supposed to eliminate others? How did they end up being eliminated themselves? Qin Xiao, Yang Yixiao, and the others felt lightheaded. It was just a moment ago that the enforcement squad had been dispatched to investigate Fan Xiaoshu, but who could have predicted that all of them would end up being ejected from the mountain? What in the world happened? You don't have any jade tokens, so it shouldn't be possible for you to be eliminated, Scholastic Master Ran Fei exclaimed. The head of the enforcement squad struggled to his feet as he explained, Fan Xiaoshu captured us and set up a teleportation formation to send us out. He set up a teleportation formation to send you all out? Everyone was stunned. Meanwhile, on the mountain, Zhongxian turned around to look at the dazed Fan Xiaofeng and said, "Let's go and find Fan Xiaoxing." Chapter 1877. Even he has got eye. Fan Xiaofeng felt as if he was dreaming. Fan Xiaoshu had always been stronger than him, but it was only by a small degree. Yet, within just a few moments, not only did he witness the other party defeating Yang Yixiao and his team with ease, he even saw the other party tossing the enforcement squad members, who had approached them to investigate the matter, out of the mountain one after another. This was way too extreme. Snap out of it, Xiaofeng. Someone is blocking our way. Fan Xiaoshu's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Raising his gaze, he saw two young men standing in their way. I won't be making another move. Try doing what I told you earlier, Zhongxian instructed. Yes. Knowing that this was a good opportunity for him to temper himself, Fan Xiaofeng gritted his teeth and dashed forward. When he was fighting with the head of the three youths earlier, Fan Xiaoshu had given him quite a few pointers regarding his battle style. Putting them into practice now, he found that his movements felt much more natural than before, and he was in a far better position to deal with whatever was thrown his way. It did not take long before he eliminated those two youths standing in his path. The pointers that you gave me have really enhanced my fighting prowess. Watching as the two youths were teleported away, Fan Xiaofeng could not stop trembling in agitation. Had it been in the past, he would have struggled to eliminate even one of them. Yet, he found that he was able to deflect every single one of their blows with ease and launch a decisive counterattack to take down the two of them swiftly. When he turned to look at Fan Xiaoshu once more, what was in his eyes was no longer awe but reverence. Seeing that the young man from the Fan clan had acquired some knowledge from the earlier battle, Zhongxian added, "Practical battle is the best way for one to improve. It's true that the rules of this free-for-all elimination examination are filled with flaws, but it's able to trigger one's desperation and stimulate the growth of the examinees, making them more confident than before. When faced with a problem, the first reaction you should have isn't how you can get away but how you can deal with it." There was no denying that luck played a heavy part in such a free-for-all elimination examination. If one encountered the strongest contender at the start of the examination, one could very well be eliminated there and then. Furthermore, the examinees were allowed to form alliances, which meant that the remaining 100 would not be the strongest of the 100. But so what? Those who persevered through the examination would surely enjoy a huge boost in confidence, and their cultivation should advance faster and faster from then on. If two individuals were similar in terms of talent, what would make the difference between them were their state of mind and encounters in life. After defeating quite a few opponents, Fan Xiaofeng had become much more confident from before, too. Just as the other party had said, his first reaction in the face of meeting an opponent was how he could get away and ensure his survival. However, the thought that was dominating his mind at the moment was instead how he could best eliminate his opponent. This change in attitude would make all the differences in Fan Xiaofeng's future progress as a cultivator. Seeing that Fan Xiaofeng received his message, Zhongxian nodded with a smile. Offense is often the best defense. As expected of a genius of the 100 schools of philosophers, the other party's intelligence was indeed far above that of the master teachers whom he had taught before. Of course, the other party was still a long way off from matching his direct disciples. While making their way over to Fan Xiaoxing, Zhongxian continued offering pointers to Fan Xiaofeng. He knew that Fan Xiaoxing was not in any danger from the scan of his spiritual perception, so he was in no rush at all. Along the way, the examinees whom they met would be eliminated without fail, and those battles further tempered Fan Xiaofeng's fighting skills. He became more and more confident. An hour later, they finally arrived in the forest beside the mountain stream, where Fan Xiaoxing had chosen to hide himself. The current Fan Xiaoxing seemed to have run out of luck. He had been discovered by a group of examinees. Individually, those examinees were weaker than him, but with their strength combined, they formed a force exceeding what Fan Xiaoxing could deal with. Cold sweat dripped down his face as he anxiously assessed the group before him. Just when he was reaching his limits, he caught sight of Fan Xiaoxu and Fan Xiaofeng in his peripheral vision, and his eyes lit up in relief. "Hey, over here." He had thought that the two of them would rush over to help him deal with the lot surrounding him, but contrary to what he thought, the two of them stopped at the edge of the forest. He saw Fan Xiaoxu pointing at him and saying, "Did you see that? A single move is all it takes for the tide of battle to turn against one." "You're right. Xiaoxing really should have thought it through before making that move earlier." Fan Xiaofeng nodded in agreement. Just a moment ago, he had been equals with Fan Xiaoxing. Who could have known that in a short hour, the other party would end up becoming so weak? "If you were in his place, what would you have done?" Zhong Xian asked. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. As much as this was an examination, this was also a trial to test Fan Xiaofeng. "I would use the third move of the shallow water fist accompanied with the spirit leaf movement technique." Fan Xiaofeng replied without much hesitation. Shallow water fist emulates the essence of catching a fish in shallow waters. It requires you to have a deep understanding of your opponent in order to ensure its success. However, just as you are able to see your opponent's move, your opponent is able to see your move as well. Furthermore, the complex movements of the spirit leaf movement technique would just make it harder for you to control your shallow water fist. Zhong Xian shook his head. "Ah, you're right. I was so focused on dealing with the opponent's attack that I forgot about the flaws of shallow water fist. It would indeed be a poor choice to pair it with the spirit leaf movement technique. Coordinating it with the emerald ripple palm should work out much better. If that's the case, I should be able to deal with 2 of them within 7 blows, and the remaining 2 in 5 more." Fan Xiaofeng analyzed contemplatively. Yuan Zhongxian nodded in response. Through his pointers and a series of practical battles, Fan Xiaofeng had indeed made major improvements in his fighting technique. He was already able to reflect and correct his own mistakes. While the two of them were engaged in an intense discussion, Fan Xiaoxing was on the verge of wailing. "What shallow water palm and spirit leaf movement technique? Shallow your head. Can't you two talk later? Don't you see that I'm on the verge of being pummeled to death?" Peng peng. While moving in a fluster, Fan Xiaoxing sustained 2 more hits to his eyes, causing them to swell up. He had thought that this should be enough to convince the two of them to rush right in to help him, but their discussion simply droned on. While that strike to the face will induce temporary blindness and vertigo in the opponent, such attacks are rarely able to land squarely, especially given that the head is one of the vitals that a cultivator will protect at all costs. "If you were in his place, where would you strike?" "I think that I would strike the ankles. That fellow harnesses great strength in his body, so if I strike his ankles, I should be able to affect his balance and throw him off guard. Even if my attack failed to land, I would be able to divert his attention away, thus creating an opportunity for me to strike his jade token." Indeed. This isn't a life-and-death battle but an elimination round. The jade token should always be the main focus of one's attacks. Peng peng. Fan Xiaoxing sustained 2 more punches on his face, causing fresh blood to trickle down his lips. "What about this punch?" This punch was executed a little awkwardly, but it struck an ideal position. It successfully induced a momentary daze in the opponent. If I were in his place, I would have struck the mouth and sent out a sweeping kick right after. This way, I would be able to overwhelm my enemy, and the jade token would be exposed for an instant. It's not a bad idea on your part to perform a sweeping kick, but you neglected the limitations of your own body. Due to the cultivation technique you practice, your zhenqi wouldn't be able to flow fast enough to your lower body to conduct a powerful lower kick. If you executed a weak or delayed sweeping kick, it would instead leave you open for a moment. Ah, you're right. What should I do then? Think about it. Should I try to attack the jade token with my left hand instead? Of course not. There'd only be a 30% chance of success if you struck the jade token with your left hand, and there's a good chance that you might even be counterattack. Zhong Xian frowned in displeasure. It was just a moment that he had thought that the other party was a quick learner, but all of his expectations fell through the next moment. What the heck is this? Isn't the answer very clear? Having two of the countermeasures that he had proposed refuted, Fan Xiaofeng fell into a state of confusion. What should I do then? What else can you do? Zhong Xian spat lividly. Of course, it's to continue hitting his face. Since you have claimed the upper hand, as long as you continue your offense, you'll be able to dominate the flow of the battle, thus putting your enemy in a passive position. Peng peng peng. As soon as those words were spoken, Fan Xiaoxing sustained several more punches to his face. Look, even he's got it, Zhong Xian exclaimed in exasperation. Fan Xiaoxing cried. Chapter 1878 Creating Opportunities. I see. Seeing how Fan Xiaoxing was struck to the point where he was completely astonished, possibly forgetting even his own name, Fan Xiaofeng's eyes lit up as he nodded in agitation. Xiaoxu was indeed an amazing person. He had seen through the crux in an instant. If it had been him, not only would his attack have failed, the other party might even have been able to turn the tables on him. However, with just a couple more punches, the other party would be completely incapacitated, thus sealing the outcome of the battle. While it required more moves, there was no denying that this was a much safer option. Perhaps, it might even be the most efficient way to end the battle. Do you think that it's impossible to counterattack just because he has been struck in his face several times consecutively? Fan Xiaoxu suddenly asked. Ah, is it still possible to make a comeback after that? I'm afraid that I don't really know how to cope with such a situation, Fan Xiaofeng replied in embarrassment. Had he been in Fan Xiaoxing's place, those few punches would have surely destroyed him. He would have lost his cool and possibly lost the battle too. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Hit a person but not their face. This was a common saying among the populace. It was considered a huge humiliation to have one's face struck. Situations where you don't know how to retaliate often contain the greatest opportunity to turn the tables. Since the enemy has been focusing their attack on his face, they're bound to be open elsewhere, like the chest or the crotch, Zhong Xian said. This. Fan Xiaofeng widened his eyes in realization. Indeed. In a battle, the head is the most protected area. In order to land consecutive hits on the head, it's inevitable that one will have to get into extremely close quarters with the other party. At a moment like this, striking elsewhere can achieve unexpected result. Peng peng. While they were speaking, Fan Xiaoxing was still getting struck in his head. He could almost see stars spinning around him. I can't count on those 2B asterisk stars to save me. Seeing how those two were engrossed in their discussion, showing not a sliver of desire to save him, Fan Xiaoxing wiped the tears from his eyes. He had thought that he would be saved by the arrival of his comrades, but it felt like things had only gotten worse with their arrival. That being said, there was some logic to what they were saying. Those fellows were too engrossed in hitting his face, so they had unintentionally dropped their defenses around other places. I have no choice but to give it a try. Suffering another punch, Fan Xiaoxing gritted his teeth and kicked his foot upward. Peng. He happened to strike one of the assailants in the crotch, and the latter immediately fell to the ground like a shrimp. I succeeded. Seeing how he had managed to defeat one of them so easily, Fan Xiaoxing immediately felt a surge of confidence. His heart could not help but beat in exhilaration. It was true that those two were unreliable as allies, but their analysis of the battle was indeed spot on. While barely defending against the onslaught of the remaining 3 cultivators using his zhenqi, he pricked up his ears and listened intently. At this point, the other 2 were still in the midst of their discussion. The 4 of them are coordinating tightly with one another, and the cultivator whom Xiaoxing has just kicked happened to be their leader. His abrupt incapacitation has introduced a moment of fluster among the rest as they struggle to readjust their collaboration formation. If I were in his position, I would use the chinkping fist together with our clan's flowing water conception to suppress the rest of them. Using the chinkping fist together with the flowing water conception is indeed a good idea. However, the key right now should be to take down the grey-robed man, who has taken over the role of maintaining the collaboration formation. As long as he is around, the formation will remain a threat. No matter how agile and flexible your movements are, it'll be hard for you to overwhelm the remaining three of them when they are covering one another tightly. Ah, you're right. But how should we deal with that grey-robed man? It's pretty simple. You can use the sunflower steps to back away before jabbing your finger forth 3 inches to the left. The grey-robed man will then charge forward in response, and that will present an opportunity to take him down. I should give it a try. Fan Xiaoxing was not too inclined to believe that such a move would really lure the grey-robed man into dashing forward, but he did not have many options. Thus, clenching his teeth tightly, he activated the sunflower steps and retreated 2 meters back. After which, using his finger as a sword, he jabbed forth with imposing momentum. Due to the nature of the collaboration formation, Fan Xiaoxing's retreat caused the trio sustaining the formation to be drawn in his direction. The grey-robed man maintaining the formation ended up being pulled over as well, causing him to come into the line of attack of the jab that Fan Xiaoxing had launched. A burst of sword chi struck the grey-robed man's jade token squarely. Catcher. With a look of disbelief on his face, the grey-robed man was embraced by a brilliant burst of light as he vanished. It worked. Fan Xiaoxing was stunned. He had thought that those two were just prattling on about nonsensical theories, but who could have known that their suggestions would turn out to work in practice? Having gotten rid of 2 of his opponents so easily, his heart pounded wildly in excitement. Also, it was only around this moment that he realized that the discussions, which had been spoken openly a moment ago, had switched to Zhenqi telepathy, which meant that his opponents were unable to hear those words. It seemed like it was not that the 2 of them did not want to save him but that they hoped for him to win this battle with his own strength. Just that, there was still one last doubt. The 2 of them should not have been too much stronger than him, so how were they able to come up with such ingenious attacks one after another? Even casual pointers from them actually allowed him to achieve victory so easily. Was it about how spectators had a clearer view of what was happening compared to those directly involved in a situation? Knowing that this was no time for him to be deep in thought, he continued pricking his ears up to pay careful attention to what was being said. The other party's voices continued. Since their collaboration formation has been undone, should we focus the attack on one of them first to take him down quickly before going for the other? Of course not. While the threat of the collaboration formation has been resolved, the fact that they are no longer in a decisive advantage anymore means that the last 2 remaining opponents will be far more wary of you. If you assault one of them, the other will make use of whatever opening you show to take you down. What you should do at this moment is stand your ground and focus on defense. Focus on defense. It was because he thought that the words of those 2 made perfect sense that he had moved according to their instructions earlier. However, at that very moment, Fan Xiaoxing could not help but frown doubtfully. Even without the collaboration formation, he would still be unable to cope with the assault of 2 equally powerful opponents simultaneously. It had not been easy for him to take down the other 2 opponents, so he should make use of this momentum to take down the remaining 2. If he became defensive at such a moment, it would only be a matter of time before his stamina was whittled down. I don't necessarily have to do as they say. Those 2 fellows can't always be right anyway. Recalling how those 2 refused to charge in to help him, choosing to stand by the side to watch the commotion instead, Fan Xiaoxing gritted his teeth in anger. With a cold harumph, he raised his palm and charged toward one of the opponents. Pa. Focusing all of his zhenqi into his palm strike, just as Fan Xiaoxing felt like he was going to finally overpower the opponent before him, his heart jolted fearfully as his eyes narrowed in shock. Unknowingly, a foot had appeared right in front of him. Pa. He was struck in his vitals, causing him to fly all the way back. The excruciating pain from the kick nearly caused him to blank out. You were right, Xiaoxu. He focused his offense on one person, and that allowed the other party to grasp hold of his weakness. Fan Xiaofeng exclaimed in excitement upon seeing that the theory was indeed true. Indeed. If he had chosen to go on the defensive, those two would have swiftly fallen into a state of fluster. After all, they have just witnessed two of their comrades being wiped out in a moment of inattention, and they have lost the safety of the collaboration formation. At such a time, they would surely be more anxious than ever to defeat him. If only he had waited 3 moves, the panic that they are feeling would have been magnified manyfold, causing them to make much riskier movements in hopes of ending the battle quick. That would have created an ideal opportunity to strike. It's truly a huge pity, Fan Xiaoshu said. A battle is all about grasping timing and seeking opportunities. If there are no opportunities in sight, you just have to create one. Yes, you're right. Fan Xiaofeng nodded vehemently in agreement. Grasping timing and seeking opportunities. Suppressing the excruciating pain that he was suffering from, Fan Xiaoxing forced himself to his feet and raised his guard once more. Seeing that Fan Xiaoxing had stood up once more, the two opponents flinched slightly in astonishment. Anxiety and fear could be seen reflected on their faces. With a ferocious roar, one of the opponents charged forward. His charge might have seemed reckless, but in truth, he was trying to create an opportunity for his comrade. Understanding this logic, Fan Xiaoxing knew better than to move recklessly this time around. He immediately scrunched his body together and charged toward the second opponent. Meanwhile, the second opponent noticed the openings that the first opponent had exposed to Fan Xiaoxing, and he was intending to move in coordination to cover the first opponent. However, not expecting Fan Xiaoxing to not fall for the bait at all and go for him instead, the second opponent was rammed down in an instant, causing a stream of blood to gush down his nose. It worked. Seeing how everything had worked out well, tears of joy began streaming down Fan Xiaoxing's eyes. Those two unreliable B***stards, they had not forsaken him yet. Chapter 1879 Small fries should scram to the side. UN. Seeing that Fan Xiaoxing had understood the intentions behind their conversation, Zhongxian nodded his head in approval. Since he had borrowed Fan Xiaoshu's identity, he had to give something back to those in ancient sage Zikai's lineage in compensation. Through the general pointers he offered them and inculcating in them a habit of reflection, they would be able to continue improving themselves even after he left. Peng peng peng. After taking down 2 of the opponents and eliminating one of them, there was only one last person remaining. It didn't take long for Fan Xiaoxing to subdue him too. After crushing their jade tokens, he stomped up to Fan Xiaoshu and Fan Xiaofeng, wanting to berate them for simply watching the commotion by the side. But after a moment of hesitation, he chose instead to clasp his fist and bow slightly. Thank you for your pointers earlier. Zhongxian waved his hand calmly in response. It didn't matter to him whether the other party as grateful to his help or not. He was just doing what he thought was right to him. This was the man he was all along, principled, humble, and low profile. Everything happened so quickly earlier. How did you all see through their flaws and come up with a countermeasure with just a look? Fan Xiaoxing asked doubtfully. His cultivation was around the same level as the other 2 of them, but why was he unable to see through anything at all, whereas the pointers given out by those words ended up becoming words of gold? It was as if they could peer right into the hearts of others. Xiaoshu was the one who taught me this. Fan Xiaofeng replied excitedly. In a battle, one has to observe one's opponent carefully and determine his intentions in order to predict his movements. After which, he moved on to throw out several other ways. Hearing those words, Fan Xiaoxing was rendered completely mystified. He had never heard of those at all, and it was definitely not part of the lineage within their clan either. How did Fan Xiaoshu know about all this? Cultivation is not about blind diligence, it requires one to ruminate and evaluate. Seeing the doubt in Fan Xiaoxing's eyes, Zhongxian explained calmly. However, before he could finish his words, he suddenly turned his head to the side. Voila! There was a gust of wind, and following which, 3 groups of people arrived from all around the forest. Each of the groups consisted of 4 people, and altogether, there were 12 people in total. Coming from 3 different directions, they sealed off all routes of escape for Zhongxian and the other 2. They are the ones. They have eliminated quite a few people along the way. If we don't partner together to get rid of them, it's only a matter of time before they destroy us too, one of the team leaders harumphed coldly. This team leader was a tall and bulky individual. His voice was loud and deep, a little reminiscent of metal clanging against one another. I guess we have to thank them for eliminating so many people for us then, another team leader spoke up with a smile. He turned to Zhongxian and said, "You should have curbed yourselves a little. I don't deny that you are strong, but in battles like this, knowing when to lie low is also of utmost importance. Are you challenging us?" Before Fan Xiaoxing could make sense of the situation, Fan Xiaofeng had already stepped forward with a confident smile on his face. "Let's not waste any time then. All of you should come at us together." Along the way, they had already eliminated at least 70 examinees by now. Most likely, their results had already sprinted all the way to the top. It was inevitable that they would catch the attention of other teams. After all, it was a common strategy for weaklings to band up together to get rid of the greatest threat in a competition. Given their spectacular accomplishments, it was just a matter of time before teams began to partner with one another in an attempt to eliminate them. If they were to succeed, their results would be moved over to them, allowing them to leap to the first place in a single shot. Xiaofeng. Not expecting the other party to be so reckless as to provoke the other three teams, Fan Xiaoxing's face turned green from fright. That was 12 people before them. Against such a huge force, they would surely be crushed without the slightest sliver of doubt. To provoke them further at a timing like this was no different from courting death. "Come at us together. Come your head. I have just finished my battle a while ago, and I can hardly open my eyes at all. I'll really die if I were to fight those 12 of them right now. You want to fight us together? Lad, you sure are arrogant, aren't you?" The bulky young man sneered coldly. "Since you are asking for it, don't blame us for not showing mercy then. Attack." It was apparent that they had already negotiated with one another before coming over to confront them. As the bulky young man spoke, the 12 of them slowly advanced forward, making sure to leave no gap for them to escape at all. Xiaoxu. Despite facing a numerical disadvantage, Fan Xiaofeng didn't seem nervous in the least. Instead, his eyes were gleaming brighter and brighter in excitement. He turned to look at Fan Xiaoxu, only to see the latter nodding his head in affirmation. Thus, with a joyful war cry, Fan Xiaofeng dashed right into the crowd of enemies. "Xiaofeng, don't be reckless." Fan Xiaoxing felt as if his body had turned completely cold. That was 12 people in total, and none of their cultivation was any lower than theirs. To dash right in at this moment was as good as seeking death. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Xiaoxu, we need to devise a plan to save Xiaofeng and escape. Panicked, Fan Xiaoxing turned to Zhongxian and urged anxiously. "Escape? There's no need for that. Calm down and see what Xiaofeng is capable of," Zhongxian replied with a shake of his head. It was just a moment ago that he had corrected Fan Xiaofeng's state of mind. If he were to encourage the latter to flee at this moment, wouldn't all of the confidence he had built up be shattered in an instant? As a teacher, there was no way he would allow such a thing to occur. "But we'll die at this rate." Fan Xiaoxing didn't think that Fan Xiaoxu would be as extreme as Fan Xiaofeng. Just as he was conflicted as to what he should do, he suddenly saw the bulky young man charging right across Fan Xiaofeng. Hula! With his fingers spread wide like a fan, he thrust his palm right toward Fan Xiaoxu's head, seemingly wanting to end his life. Just based on his aura, the bulky young man felt no different from an ordinary Saint Nine Dan. However, when he drove his strength to its limits, it turned out that he was actually a half-introspective convalescence realm expert. "It's over." Fan Xiaoxing's face paled in fright. The reason why he was able to defeat the 4 of them earlier was because their cultivation was beneath his. Even so, he was still badly pummeled in the end. However, with the frightening might of this bulky young man and many other experts watching menacingly from the surroundings, it seemed like they were really doomed this time around. With a wail of desolation, he began thinking about where he should have a drink to drown his sorrows after he was eliminated. On the other hand, a slight frown crept onto Fan Xiaoxu's forehead, and instead of dodging, he raised his hand. "Pa." Before the palm thrust of the bulky young man could land, Fan Xiaoshu's slap had already struck the other party's face squarely. The slap seemed to be packed with plenty of power as the bulky young man spun 2 rounds before crashing into the ground. You! The bulky young man stunned for a moment before his days warped in rage, and he charged at Zhongxian once more. Pa! Another slap struck the other side of his face, and he spun 2 rounds before crashing into the ground once more. Small fries like you should scram to the side. Don't come here and cause trouble. Zhongxian harumphed coldly. Aye. The bulky young man wanted to say something to at least salvage some of his reputation, but when he thought about the 2 slaps he had just suffered, his face immediately reddened, and his words choked up in his throat. Was he really a small fry unworthy of the other party making a move? He turned to look at Fan Xiaofeng and saw that there were already 4 men collapsed on the ground. Even though Fan Xiaofeng's cultivation was beneath his, for some reason, his movements were exceptionally difficult to deal with. It was as if he was a wolf who had leaped into a pack of sheep. There was no one here who could withstand more than 3 blows from him. All right, I'll go fight with him. Without much hesitation, the bulky young man turned around and charged at Fan Xiaofeng instead. Fan Xiaoxing was so shocked that his eyes nearly plopped to the ground. Can anyone tell me what is happening here? Why did Xiaoshu and Xiaofeng become so weird in the hour we have parted from one another? Am I dreaming or something? Fan Xiaoxing was dazed. Chapter 1880. What a coincidence. On the square located along the perimeter of the mountain, Shang Wu suddenly materialized in midair before falling heavily to the ground. He had just been teleported out of the mountain under the effects of a teleportation formation. He looked at the sky with a dazed look in his eyes, almost as if he was doubting his own existence. He was a descendant of ancient sage Zi Xiu's lineage, a genius blessed with great talents. He had to step over thousands of his peers in order to come to where he currently was, but after coming this far, even though he had collaborated with several others to gang up on someone weaker than him, he still ended up being eliminated so easily. The thought of others mocking him for this failure was more than enough to make his entire body cringe in sheer embarrassment. Struggling to his feet, he was just about to hide his face and leave silently when he heard a shocked voice exclaiming in the air, "Shang Wu, you have been eliminated too? I didn't think that I would see you here." Following which, a figure walked over. After catching a closer sight of the other party, Shang Wu was stunned for a moment before exclaiming as well, "Shi Yuan, what are you doing here?" Shi Yuan was a descendant of ancient sage Zi Shi, as well as a good friend of Shang Wu's. In terms of fighting prowess, they were a close match with one another, so they would frequently spar with one another. It was already incredibly humiliating for him to be eliminated so swiftly into the examination, but who could have thought that his good friend would end up being eliminated even quicker than he did? Hi, let's not talk about such depressing matters. I attacked someone weaker than me in hopes of raising his ranking, but who could have thought that the other party would end up sending me here? Shi Yuan shook his head bitterly. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. You were also eliminated by someone weaker than you? Shang Wu was stunned as a thought surfaced in his head. May I know who that person is? It's embarrassing even just to talk about it. The other party is only at St. Nine Dan Pinnacle, a huge gap away from matching you and me. Shi Yuan's face reddened in shame. He's also a St. Nine Dan Pinnacle cultivator too? Who is it? Shang Wu asked anxiously. A descendant of ancient sage Zi Kai, Fan Xiaofeng. Shi Yuan replied awkwardly. It really is him. I was eliminated by that fellow as well. Shang Wu widened his eyes in disbelief. Wait a moment. You were eliminated by Fan Xiaofeng too? Shi Yuan was stunned. Indeed. He fought against all 12 of us alone and ended up eliminating all of us. Shang Wu explained agitatedly. However, before he could finish his piece, another shocked exclamation sounded in the air. You were eliminated by Fan Xiaofeng too? What a coincidence. We were eliminated by him as well. He single-handedly sent the 3 of us out of the examination. Following which, 4 young ladies walked over. It really is a huge coincidence. It was the exact same for us too. 2 young men and a young lady walked over. Oh, All of you were eliminated by Fan Xiaofeng? The same happened to us too. We were eliminated so tragically. Yet another 5 more youths walked over. Hey, you aren't the most tragic ones, alright? Do you see Yang Yixiao and his group over there? It seems like he was eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Ziyuan too. A few more people walked over and joined in the conversation. Watching as a huge crowd of similar ill-fated individuals gathered around him, Shongwu's lips twitched wildly. It was just an instant, but the name Fan Xiaofeng had already rallied more than 40 people over. Shockingly, they were all eliminated by Fan Xiaofeng single-handedly. Was there some kind of mistake here? How could that fellow possibly not sustain any injuries or run out of zhenqi when he had fought with so many opponents already? There's no need to feel down. Come, follow me. A young man walked up to Shongwu and consoled. Yuan. Recognizing the person standing before him to be Bo Shu from the lineage of ancient sage Zi Shu, Shongwu nodded slightly before following behind the young man. Bo Shu brought Shongwu out of the crowd to another group of eliminated young men and said, "It's a pleasure to meet all of you. We were eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Zi Kai. May I know if..." "Ah, what a coincidence. We were eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Zi Kai too." "Me too. Wow, we are comrades of the same plight. We really should get along well." A commotion flared up, and it took only an instant for the group to expand to dozens of people. After which, Bo Shu brought Shongwu away to approach yet another group, but before they could begin speaking, the other party had already begun speaking. "You are eliminated by Fan Xiaofeng too, right? It's the same for us too." Shongwu. At this moment, he really had no idea what to make of this peculiar situation. "Everything, hear us. We wish to establish a fellowship of examinees eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Zi Kai. Is there anyone who wishes to join us?" A voice echoed across the crowd. "I wish to register." "Me too, me too." The invitation was met with popular response and voices of approval rippled across the crowd. It was in this instant that Shongwu suddenly felt that it wasn't a humiliation that he was eliminated by the weaker Fan Xiaofeng. Instead, it felt like a symbol of honor, a mark that solidarity amongst him and the others. "That's all." Fan Xiaoxing stared at the impassive Fan Xiaofeng as he felt as if his notion of what being powerful meant had just been refreshed. If he had been the one who had fought against these 12 opponents, it was likely that he wouldn't have even gotten a chance to flee. Yet, Fan Xiaofeng, who was at the same cultivation realm as him, actually defeated all of them with ease. Just what in the world had the other party been through over the past hour for such a massive change to happen to him? On the other hand, paying no heed to Fan Xiaoxing's incredulity, Fan Xiaofeng walked up to Zhongxian and asked, "So, how did I do this time around?" His eyes reflected deep nervousness reminiscent of a student facing his teacher after forgetting to complete his holiday assignment. "How did you do?" Zhongxian's eyes were filled with boredom as he waved his hands perfunctorily. "It's SOSO. He couldn't even bother to comment on Fan Xiaofeng's performance anymore. After all of the pointers he had given and the battles that the other party had been through, this was all the other party could do. It was fortunate that he was adopting a persona at the moment, or else he would have really died from embarrassment. All of the disciples whom he, Zhongxian, had taught eventually became powerhouses who possessed extraordinary battle sense. However, the one standing before him was truly. It was just a moment ago that he thought that the descendants of the 100 schools of philosophers possessed superior intelligence, capable of comprehending and assimilating new knowledge swiftly. Yet, it was as if Fan Xiaofeng's intelligence had turned against him. He was focusing too much of the trivialities that he was losing sight of what was important, causing his movements to lack spirit. I was wrong. I know that I didn't do well for the earlier battle." Sensing Zhongxian disappointment, Fan Xiaofeng hurriedly lowered his head and apologized with a trembling voice. His accomplishments were all built upon the other party's pointers. If the other party was no longer willing to teach him anymore, how was he going to climb to greater heights? At the same time, Fan Xiaoxing clutched his hair as this seemingly ridiculous scene unfolded before his eyes. He found himself unable to catch up with the thought process of the other two at all. Can this even be called didn't do well? Zhongxian snapped. Fine, I guess I'll give you some leeway for your self-awareness. Earlier, for the third move that you executed after charging into the crowd, you could have used the coupled arm fist to eliminate that red-robed young man with the least amount of effort. Why did you switch to the startling front hand to attack that blue-robed young lady at the right instead? Do you know that you have wasted 3 whole moves due to the choice you have made? Think of the time you have wasted with that. If they had recovered during that period of time, you would have been dead before you even knew it. Also, for the kick earlier, you could have dodged it in advance too. Why did you catch it instead? Are you trying to show off that you are capable of defending yourself, or are you trying to flaunt the resilience of your scrawny body? As Zhongxian spoke, his fury seemed to build up even more and more, such that he ended up pointing out 8 flaws in a single breath. Furthermore, every single one of these flaws pointed out were spot on in the analysis. Fan Xiaofeng was rendered speechless by the questions. Everything had happened so quickly earlier, such that Fan Xiaofeng didn't think that Fan Xiaoshu would have been able to remember every move and every flaw so clearly. He was initially proud that he had managed to eliminate 12 people at once, but those words jolted him back to reality. He knew that he still had a long way to go before reaching the top. There was no pride in just being able to defeat weaklings. Humility and low profile, that was the way to go. Xiaofeng was already so formidable in the battle, but Xiaoshu was still able to point out so many flaws in his movements. That eye of discernment is truly. Fan Xiaoxing gulped down a mouthful of saliva. It was at this instant that he felt that he had gotten a glimpse into the reason why Fan Xiaofeng was able to make such a huge progress within a short hour. It turned out that everything was Fan Xiaoshu's credit. Xiaoshu, can you teach me as well? I wish to become as powerful as Xiaofeng too. Unable to stand it any longer, Fan Xiaoxing walked up to Zhongxian and clasped his fist earnestly, putting down the pride that he had shown previously. Chapter 1881. The descendant of ancient sage Zilu. Zhongqing was a descendant of ancient sage Zilu. He was the person in charge for conducting this year's entrance examination for the great frontistery of Confucianism. He was also the middle-aged man who had read the rules in the sky earlier prior to the commencement of the examination. Unlike the other teachers, he returned back to his room after activating the formation surrounding the mountain. He didn't wait at the elimination region for the revelation of the results. It was just a freshman selection examination. It would do for him to just know the final results. Such a trivial event was not worth his constant attention. He stood before a table, dabbed a brush with ink, and began writing on a sheet of paper. The scent of ink swiftly suffused the room. His handwriting was neat, and the characters he wrote carried deep conceptions behind them. With just a glance, one could feel the serene state he was in. Who? A figure suddenly appeared in the room. Seeing that the middle-aged man was leisurely writing calligraphy, the figure's eyebrows shot up as he exclaimed, "Brother Zhong, what are you doing here? You need to head over to the examination venue to take a look. There's something weird going on with the examination." If Zhongxian was here, he would surely be able to recognize the figure who had just appeared in the room. Nangong Yuanfeng. Yuanfeng, you are panicking once again. I have always told you that you need to calm your mind, but you just wouldn't listen. It's just an examination amongst the younglings. What's there to panic about? If you don't try to correct that problem of yours, you'll never be able to advance your cultivation any further than it is. Even without raising his head, Zhongqing seemed to still be able to recognize the identity of the person standing before him. As his brush continued moving on the paper elegantly, he replied with a calm voice. "Brother Zhong, I appreciate your kind advice, but this isn't the moment to be calm at all. The elimination examination has already descended into a huge mess." Nangong Yuanfeng exclaimed anxiously. "A huge mess? What kind of mess is it?" Zhongqing asked calmly as he continued writing his calligraphy with cadence. "The examinees are being eliminated too quickly in large numbers. I fear that the examination might end before the 6 hours are up. Furthermore, a lot of the examinees whom we have thought well of have all been eliminated. It's unlikely that those who remain at the end of the examination would be really the strongest 100 of the examinees." Nangong Yuanfeng explained worriedly. He was on the scene earlier, so he saw everything clearly. Even a top-notch genius like Yang Yixiao ended up being eliminated too. The other experts whom they had been keeping a special eye of also ended up failing terribly too. And the reason was solely because they had encountered the descendants of ancient sage Zikai. By this point, it had almost become an unspoken rule of the examination that anyone who encountered ancient sage Zikai's descendants would be eliminated. At this rate, the examination would no longer be a test of strength but a complete test of luck. It would bank solely on whether one was lucky enough to avoid ancient sage Zikai's descendants throughout the entire examination. For a solemn examination to be reduced to such a farce, how could he possibly not panic? Oh, isn't this for the better? Zhongqing didn't appear to be surprised to hear the news at all. He dabbed his brush in ink once more and began writing another character before continuing on with a light chuckle. The talents of the descendants of the 100 schools of philosophers don't vary too much from one another. All we want is to narrow down the numbers to 100 of them. As for who they are, that's of secondary concern. No matter how powerful they are at the moment, they are bound to achieve great things after undergoing the tutelage of the great frontistery of Confucianism. Well, I guess that your words make sense too. Seeing how calm Zhongqing was, Nangong Yuanfeng's worries seemed to slowly dispel as well. It was true that they were interested in just narrowing down the numbers to 100 examinees. As for who the examinees were, that was not of too much importance. The elimination examination was not completely fair, but ultimately, everything could be traced back to the limitations of their strength. If one had neither the strength nor the means to survive until the end, they only had themselves to blame for. While what you say do make sense, the issue is that most of the examinees have been eliminated by the same person, and their numbers are still growing. Furthermore, it seems like they have formed some kind of weird fellowship. Nangong Yuanfeng said. They were eliminated by the same person? Who is it? Yang Yixiao? Or is it Duan Muxiao? Zhongqing asked. That's not it. They are all eliminated by a descendant of ancient sage Zikai, Nangong Yuanfeng replied. A descendant of ancient sage Zikai? Not expecting to hear such an answer, Zhongqing was visibly stunned for a moment. You are referring to Fan Xiaoshu, Fan Xiaofeng, and Fan Xiaoxing, right? He had browsed through the name list submitted by the various clans, and he remembered the names of every single participating examinee. That's right, Nangong Yuanfeng replied affirmatively. The descendants of ancient sage Zikai have never performed spectacularly well in examinations before. The fact that they are able to rise to the top in the examination shows that they must have put in a lot of hard work. It's fine, leave them to do whatever they want. Everyone has their own limits, and just because they are leading at the moment doesn't mean that they will be able to remain at the top until the end. As invigilators, our role is to observe and assess. There's no need for us to get involved. Zhongqing replied calmly as he continued writing on the paper. At this rate, it seemed like he would finish his calligraphy piece soon enough. Since you have said so, I guess there's nothing else I can say. Seeing how calm Zhongqing was, Nangong Yuanfeng shrugged nonchalantly. He was just about to turn around and leave when he suddenly recalled a matter. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The chief of the fellowship of examinees eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Zikai seems to your grandson, Zhong Zixuan. Hula. The brush gorged out a pitch-black stroke on the white paper as Zhongqing raised his head in astonishment. He knew that his grandson had participated in the examination too, and he thought that his grandson would survive till the very end. Yet, he became the chief of some kind of eliminated examinees fellowship. What the heck did that mean? Hold on for a moment. You are telling me that Zixuan has been eliminated? Even though Zhongqing dared not to believe what he was hearing, he still forcefully maintained his patient and calm attitude. Indeed. He was extremely proud that he has been eliminated early, and the fact that he serves as one of the chiefs of the organization means that everyone heeds his word. Nangong Yuanfeng said. That bastard. Zhongqing clenched his fists tightly. How in the world did that wastrel even appear in their lineage? Not only was he not embarrassed of being eliminated, he even viewed it as an honor. He really had to teach that fellow a good lesson. Forget it, just leave him be. Taking a deep breath, Zhongqing calmed down from his rage before shaking his head. In any case, I have 8 of my descendants participating in the examination. It's only because I have spoiled Zhong Zishuan ever since he was young that he acted so inappropriately. Such a thing wouldn't happen with the others. The others? Nangong Yuanfeng fell silent. There was a brief moment of silence before he asked, "Are you referring to Zhong Zifeng, Zhong Ziyu, Zhong Zishuan, and the others?" Zhongqing nodded. They should be far more reliable than Zhong Zishuan, that wastrel. Ah, they have also been eliminated as well. They are the first group to join the fellowship. If not for their vote, how could Zhong Zishuan possibly have become the chief? Speaking up to this point, Nangong Yuanfeng couldn't help but remark, "I must say that those from your lineage are truly united as one. While others are still grieving over their defeat, those from your lineage are already trying to form a fellowship. I must say that I'm truly awed by how calmly they are taking their defeat." Catcher. There was a crisp echo as the brush in Zhongqing's hand was snapped into 2. With a face as green as a lush grass field, Zhongqing spat, "Those bunch of bastards. I'll massacre them right now." Who? Zhongqing's silhouette vanished from the room in an instant. Ah! Seeing how the cool and collected man from a moment ago had erupted in rage, Nangong Yuanfeng scratched his head speechlessly. In the end, everything that Zhongqing said about remaining calm was just because the issue didn't concern him. As soon his clan members were involved, he still ended up erupting as if there was no tomorrow. But that being said, he had to admit that Fan Xiaoshu, Fan Xiaofeng, and Fan Xiaoxing were 3 really incredible people. Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. To actually eliminate the 8 examinees from ancient sage Zilu's lineage all at once, they sure were merciless. And that wasn't just all. It seemed like they didn't care whoever was backing the examinees at all. Anyone who encountered them would be eliminated in an instant. It was as if the word mercy had never crossed their minds at all. Given how many people they had offended within this short period of time, weren't they afraid that others would make things difficult for them once they enter the great frontistery of Confucianism? One must know that while the great frontistery of Confucianism was built with the combined efforts of the 72 sages, and the descendants of the 72 sages all had a hand in running the organization, it didn't mean that there was an equal distribution of power amongst all of the clans. Putting everything aside, the lineage of ancient sage Zilu, which Zhongqing was a part of, had a lot of say in the great frontistery of Confucianism due to the huge number of experts under their command. To let everything loose without caring about the consequences. It might be exhilarating at that moment, but all of the complications would swiftly come in afterward. But again, those 3 didn't seem like they would simply allow themselves to be wronged. Well, it seemed like the great frontistery of Confucianism would become very lively in the near future. Chapter 1882 Clearing the Examination. Peng 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 peng. After knocking down and eliminating more than a dozen examinees at once, Fan Xiaoxing's eyes reddened in excitement. It had been less than 2 hours since he started learning from Xiaoshu, but he had already single-handedly eliminated at least 300 examinees. Such a rate of improvement was something that he would never have dared imagine possible. For the longest time, he had thought of cultivation to be an extremely slow process where one gradually accrued power, but such a conception had been completely shattered in his mind. Yet, despite his massive improvement, he was still a long way from matching Fan Xiaofeng. The latter had eliminated at least 700 people thus far. As for Xiaoshu, he had been walking along with them, but he did not make a move at all. However, as soon as the 2 of them made the slightest mistake, they would be treated to a combo of dagger-like glares from behind and frighteningly cold criticisms. It was due to this that they were able to improve so swiftly within such a short period of time. That's more like it. Temper yourselves a little more and stabilize your cultivation. You should be able to achieve a breakthrough soon enough. After those 2 defeated the final wave of enemies, Zhongxian finally nodded with a slight hint of approval. While those 2 were a little dim-witted, through his unyielding perseverance, he still managed to induce a significant rise in their abilities. Even after this examination, the 2 of them would still benefit from the elevation in their state of mind and advancement in their fighting prowess. Of course, as for how far they would go in the future, that would not be any of his business. There are only 100 people left on the mountain. I hereby announce that the examination has prematurely ended. Along with that resounding voice, the crowd felt a surge of energy wrapping around them, and the next moment, they were teleported to a square in front of the mountain. Zhongxian looked around him and noticed that there was exactly 100 people in the square. However, other than the three of them, everyone seemed to have been inflicted with some kind of energy and looked rather unkempt. Even though most of those people looked ordinary, the fact that they could survive to the end among 2,000 other competitors meant that they likely possessed extraordinary means. Of course, more importantly, they had also had the fortune of not encountering the three of them. First and foremost, I would like to extend my congratulations to all of you for officially being recruited into the great frontistery of Confucianism as this year's batch of student. Zhong Qing announced grandly. As he spoke, his eyes inconspicuously fell on Zhongxian and the others, and his cheeks twitched a little. He felt an urge to rush forward to pummel them, but he eventually held himself back. The fact that his descendants had been eliminated by them only meant that they were still lacking. He would not abandon his honor just to make things difficult for them. Taking a deep breath, Zhongqing continued on. After this, you will each exchange your jade token for a storage ring. Within the storage is the route and method to get to the great frontistery of Confucianism, an introspective convalescence realm cultivation technique, and cultivation resources. You have 3 days to enter the great frontistery of Confucianism with your own abilities. Only if you succeed will you become full-fledged students of the great frontistery of Confucianism. I know that this test won't be too difficult for you, but allow me to give you some words of advice in advance. The earlier you get to the great frontistery of Confucianism, the higher your chances of picking out a good teacher. Naturally, it goes without saying that it will pave the way for your future cultivation. Similar to other academies, mentorship in the great frontistery of Confucianism was a mutual relationship. While the students were allowed to choose their teachers, the teachers were allowed to choose their students. The number of students that each teacher could take on was limited, so those who entered earlier would have a better chance of catching the eye of the teachers they wanted. At the same time, the resources that they were entitled to would be different as well. All right. Submit your jade tokens now. Shortly after those words were spoken, the jade token pinned on everyone's chest rose into the air, and 100 storage rings flew into everyone's hands simultaneously. Zhongxian placed his finger lightly on the ring, and the items that were inside swiftly appeared in his mind. Just as he had been told, there was an introspective convalescence realm cultivation technique manual inside. Similar to how there was no common cultivation technique that all cultivators could practice for this realm, the cultivation technique manual that was in the storage ring only pointed out a general direction. Nevertheless, with such a manual in hand, pushing for a breakthrough would be much easier. Other than the cultivation technique manual, there was a grade 9 strength shaping pill. It had the effects of refining one's body and zhenqi once more, and the process simulated the effects of a breakthrough to the introspective convalescence realm. As such, it could boost one's chances of achieving a breakthrough by around 10%. Last but not least, there was a jade token inside. Zhongxian took out the jade token and touched it lightly, but he did not feel anything at all. Seeing Zhongxian's actions, Fan Xiaofeng quickly explained, "There's a formation on the jade token. If we wish to see what is inside, we'll have to first decipher the formation. This is one of the examinations of the great frontistery of Confucianism. It's also an examination. What about those who don't specialize in formations?" Zhongxian asked. There could be those who were not too familiar with formations among the crowd, and imposing such an examination on them seemed rather unfair. Find authorized novels in WebNovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. The formation on the jade token isn't too complicated, so familiarity with formations won't help too much. The difficulty lies mainly in how intricate it is. It requires one to have precise control of one's zhenqi to decipher it carefully. While it's an examination, it's also a warning to us as well that we mustn't just focus on building up our zhenqi, and that the precision of control is extremely important as well, Fan Xiaofeng said. Hearing those words, Zhongxian nodded slightly. Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing's cultivation had yet to advance ever since they entered the mountain, but their fighting prowess had increased significantly, allowing them to easily defeat opponents after opponents. The main reason for that was that they had learned how to control and maneuver their strength efficiently and effectively. By not making the slightest useless movement and striking accurately at any openings, it was inevitable that their fighting prowess would advance so much. Swiftly scanning through the jade token, Zhongxian saw numerous inscriptions carved densely on it. It seemed like he would have to control his zhenqi to an extremely fine degree in order to decipher the inscription. While such a feat might pose a challenge to other examinees, it was a walk in the park for him. He lightly waved his hand over the jade token. Hula! The seal immediately opened, and the content within flowed into his mind. It was the exact location of the great frontistery of Confucianism and the method to entering it. Just as he had expected, the great frontistery of Confucianism was not located in the vicinity but amid a desert roughly 10,000 li away. In order to reach the destination, he would have to follow a specific path marked out on the jade token. Alright, you may start deciphering the formation on the jade token now. Seeing that everyone had begun taking out the jade tokens in the storage ring, Zhongqing shot a sweeping glance across the surroundings before saying, in the history of the great frontistery of Confucianism, the fastest record for deciphering the seal is 6 hours. In the past 100 years, the only one who has come close to this record is the descendant of Kongshe, Kongshe Yarrow, with a record of 7 hours. After that would be the descendant of ancient sage Zi Yuan, Yang Shui, with a record of 8 hours. For the rest of you, it would be a formidable feat as long as you are able to decipher the seal within a single day. While the formation on the jade token seemed simple, it was far more troublesome than it looked. Without a calm mind and sharp control of zhenqi, it would be nigh impossible to pull it off. Even the top genius of the great frontistery of Confucianism had taken a total of 7 hours to decipher it. Also, allow me to give you some words of advice. Hastiness and impatience will get you nowhere. If you can't complete this task within 3 days, even if you have cleared the elimination examination, you won't be recognized as an official student of the great frontistery of Confucianism. Zhongqing warned before waving his hand lightly. Hula! A mirror-like barrier appeared in front before everyone's eyes. This is a unique teleportation formation. As long as you have deciphered the seal on the jade token, you will be drawn into it. Following which, you just have to follow the pathway recorded on the jade token to get into the great frontistery of Confucianism. Alright, you all should get to deciphering the seal now. I would like to see what the fastest record for your batch is. Zhongqing said. But halfway through his words, he saw a ripple appearing on the mirror-like barrier. A figure slowly rose into the air before diving right into the barrier. What? Has he deciphered the formation already? For a long moment, the surroundings were overwhelmed by silence. Chapter 1883. Zhongqing's suspicions. This. Zhongxian scratched his head in embarrassment. It was true that he had deciphered the jade token, but given his low-profile character, he would have waited patiently for Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng to complete the test before heading over to the great frontistery of Confucianism. Unfortunately, he could not have expected the other party to actually whip out a barrier that would suck in anyone who had deciphered the formation. In a moment of carelessness, he actually ended up being sucked in. Turning around to look at the countless berserk faces behind him, Zhongxian shook his head helplessly and said in encouragement, "Well, everyone, try your best. I'll be going on ahead to see what's on the other side." Going on ahead? More like he has already crossed the finish line before we have even gotten ready at the starting point. Kongshe Yarrow took a total of 7 hours, but that probably wasn't even a single breath, right? Is it possible that his jade token is spoiled? You are thinking too much. How could the great frontistery of Confucianism possibly make such a mediocre mistake? That being said, it's really ridiculous for anyone to clear a seal within just a single breath. Is he still human? Find authorized novels in webnovel faster updates. Better experience. Please click for visiting. A huge uproar erupted in the area. It was just a moment earlier that Scholastic Master Zhongqing had said that even the fastest record was 6 hours, but he had actually finished it in a single breath. If so, Did that not mean that even the most talented genius in the entire history of the great frontistery of Confucianism could not even match up to a 20,000th of that young man? It was not just the examinees who were causing a huge ruckus. Zhong Qing, Nangong Yuanfeng, and the other invigilators were in a completely flustered state as well. They had thought that it would already be a huge blessing if any one of the examinees was able to make it to the great frontistery of Confucianism within a single day. But who could have known that they would encounter this monster? Were Zhong Zixuan and the others eliminated by that young man? Zhong Qing asked. That isn't entirely it, Nangong Yuanfeng said with a frown. The ones who eliminated Zhong Zixuan and the others were Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing, but he was guiding them by the side too. His guidance actually allowed those two to eliminate all 8 examinees from my lineage. Zhong Qing felt a tightness in his throat as he struggled to come to terms with what he had just seen. While others might have been oblivious to the prowess of those 8 juniors of his, he knew that they were a force that could not be underestimated in the examination. If they had not been eliminated by Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng, there was a good chance that they would have become the dark horse of the examination. Those 8 had specially undergone a rigorous training regimen in order to clear the examination, and even if they had encountered Yang Yixiao, there was a good chance that they would have been able to get away safely. Yet, all of them had ended up being eliminated just like that. Furthermore, it was one thing if that young man had made a move himself. There was no shortage of monstrously overpowered individuals in the history of the 100 schools of philosophers, but he had actually empowered others to do so through his guidance. Not even Zhong Qing himself would be capable of pulling off something like that. A middle-aged man walked over and asked, "Shall we apprehend him temporarily to check his jade token?" "There's no need for that. The fact that he's been absorbed by the barrier means that he truly wields the ability to decipher the formation. Besides, the other teachers are waiting beyond the barrier, and they should have already noticed the pulsations in the barrier. It's too late to stop him now." Zhong Qing shook his head before turning his gaze to Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng. It was a gaze filled with intrigue. Ancient sage Zikai's lineage had always been lagging behind the others. How did they suddenly become so formidable? Harboring such doubts, Zhong Qing leaped forth and appeared right before Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng. With a wave of his hand, he said, "In total, the two of you have eliminated more than half of the examinees. I would like to see if you really wield the extraordinary capabilities that you have displayed through your results in the examination." Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing clasped their fists and replied, "How do you wish to test our strength?" If they had not gone through Zhong Xian's rigorous training, they would have already been in utter panic. It was apparent that Zhong Qing was suspicious of them cheating, and the implications could be severe if they were found guilty of it. However, the elimination examination had caused a huge change in their state of mind. They were much more confident than before, such that they did not feel apprehensive even when standing before scholastic masters. "I have a really simple suggestion. I'll suppress my cultivation down to your level, and the two of you can come at me together. If you are able to defeat me, it'll prove that you do possess capabilities far beyond those of your peers," Zhong Qing explained calmly. As a sempiternal realm consummation expert, even if he did suppress his cultivation, his eye of discernment and battle experience far surpassed those of the two youths standing before him. No matter how powerful those two youths were, they would stand no chance against him if they did not possess any extraordinary capabilities. Hearing those words, Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng looked at one another and nodded resolutely before replying in unison, "Very well, we accept your challenge." They swiftly cleared the surroundings before Zhong Qing began suppressing his aura down to Saint Nine Dan. Despite his lowered cultivation, he still emanated an unfathomable aura that made others dare not challenge his authority. "I'll allow the two of you to make the first move." Zhong Qing beckoned with a single hand, and he stood calmly on the spot. No matter what, he was still a great sage expert who had lived for several centuries. Even though he had challenged Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng to a battle in hopes of clearing up his doubts, he had no intention of taking advantage of them. "Since you have said so, we won't stand on ceremony." Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing drove their zhenqi to the peak and roared. Of the 1,000 examinees that they had eliminated, there were some who had been an entire realm stronger than them. Challenging such powerful enemies had refined their sense of danger and grasp over the flow of battle. They could tell that even with his suppressed cultivation, the middle-aged man standing before them would not be an easy opponent. Thus, they chose to go all out right from the start. Hula. So, the two of them bolted forward one after another, and one of them aimed for the chest whereas the other aimed for the back. Noting the exceptional speed of the two and the decisiveness of their moves, Zhongqing nodded in approval. Not too shabby. It was no wonder they had been able to eliminate so many people in the examination, such that even his juniors had ended up falling victim to them. Their fighting prowess was indeed not to be underestimated. Putting everything aside, just the fact that they were able to empty their movements of hesitation was already an incredibly remarkable feat. It was a subconscious reflex to falter before powerful enemies and doubt one's decisions, and this was a problem that even top cultivators faced. Such hesitation might not appear to be much at first glance, but in an intense battle, granting the opponent an additional split second to react could easily spell the difference between life and death. However, if that was all they had, they would never be able to defeat him. This was because their intentions and maneuvers were utterly lacking in complexity. It was as if they were standing naked before him. He could even foresee what they would do several steps ahead. To defeat such opponents, all it would take him was one good move. With a deep sigh, he raised his two palms and thrust them downward, intending to knock the two of them back simultaneously so as to let them know the gap between them. However, before his palms could even strike, the duo bolting in his direction suddenly swerved and flanked his sides. Using the incredible momentum of their movements, they sent out a left punch and a right punch simultaneously to the both sides of his face. What? Zhongqing narrowed his eyes in astonishment. In a usual battle, should they not have started with minor movements to test out their opponent before leaping in for a decisive attack to overwhelm him in an instant? They had already been in an advantageous position earlier, so why would they change their moves all of a sudden? Furthermore, was it really fine to aim the attacks at the face of an elder like that? Humph. With a cold snort, Zhongqing swiftly redirected his palms to block the trajectory of the punches from the duo. After which, he was just about to move in to teach those two a good lesson on respecting their elders when he suddenly felt a sharp pain assaulting his chest and crotch. Lowering his head, he found that Fan Xiaoxing's leg had struck his chest whereas Fan Xiaofeng's foot had shot up his crotch. With a piercing cry of agony, Zhongqing flew over and collapsed onto the ground. His body scrunched up like a cooked prawn. Even though he was a sempiternal realm consummation cultivator, it did not mean that he had cultivated his body equally throughout. As such, he still shared the common weakness that all men faced. To be struck with such a decisive kick, it was a huge blessing that they had not cracked on the spot. However, as if out of fear that their attack would not work, those two had actually put everything they had into the previous attack, such that the excruciating pain that assaulted him left even someone of Zhongqing's caliber sweating profusely. Catcher. He had to swiftly release the seal on his junchi and recover to his sempiternal realm consummation before he was able to alleviate the injuries. Just as he was about to talk, he heard the hushed whisperings of those two not too far away. Is it just me, or does he seem really weak? Could he just be going easy on us? That can't be the true strength of a scholastic master, right? Those words were the earnest thoughts of the confused Fan Xiaoxing and Fan Xiaofeng. All along, the great frontistery of Confucianism had been the ultimate goal that they had envisioned in their minds, so they could have never imagined that they would actually be able to incapacitate one of the almighty scholastic masters with just a simple kick. It was as if the heroes whom they had worshipped since they were young had turned out to be all talk. Weak. Going easy. Zhongqing felt a surge of blood gargling within his mouth, and he completely lost his cool. Chapter 1884. The Copper Gong. Zhongqing had always valued the cultivation of character and state of mind. Calligraphy was the art of sharpening one's concentration and self-control, so he would often spend his free time with a brush in hand. Due to his devotion to the art, the calligraphy works that he produced were of exceptional quality, such that many experts would specially pay him a visit to request his pieces so as to find inner peace within them. Given his character and state of mind, an ordinary examination among the younger generation should not have fazed him in the least. But, Contrary to his expectations, all 8 examinees in his lineage, including his own grandson, had actually been eliminated in the examination. This had shaken him a little, so he wanted to challenge the 2 youths responsible for it to test their abilities. However, who could have known that a reputed scholastic master like him would end up being looked upon in disdain? Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates. Better experience, please click for visiting. Weak. Weak your head. How in the world am I weak? Zhongqing was overflowing with rage, but when he thought about the earlier battle, he found himself unable to find the words to refute their claims. While those 2 young men did not use a collaborative formation, their coordination was impeccable. Despite being a sempiternal realm consummation expert, he had been too complacent and ended up falling for their feint, which had eventually led to his downfall. Zhongqing swallowed the blood swirling in his mouth and took in a deep breath before turning to the 2 young men. Is this what Fan Xiaoshu has taught you? He had never seen these 2 young men in person before, but he had read their records. Given their track record, they should not have been so formidable in battle. That's right. Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing nodded in response. In truth, they were also a little surprised by the outcome of the battle. They had thought that a scholastic master would be an extremely difficult foe to deal with even if his cultivation was suppressed, but as soon as they used Fan Xiaoshu's battle insights, everything ended so quickly that even they were caught off guard. It was as if the other party was nothing more than a weak little chicklet. Did that not mean that as long as they continued working hard on their fighting skills, they would really be able to become invincible among their peers? Then, do you know who imparted these moves to him? Zhongqing asked. He comprehended them himself. Fan Xiaofeng replied. He had asked Fan Xiaoshu that question during the examination, and the other party had replied that these techniques had come out from sudden bouts of inspiration. He comprehended them himself? If that's really the case, his talent is really. Zhongqing remarked as his breathing hastened slightly. Yuan Feng, I need you to help deal with the issues here for the time being. I'll be making a trip back to the great frontistery of Confucianism to see who Fan Xiaoshu chooses to be his teacher. Unable to endure his curiosity, Zhongqing quickly turned around and left. No matter who Fan Xiaoshu chose to be his teacher, he would have to make sure to keep on good terms with that person. As long as Fan Xiaoshu did not die a premature death, it was only a matter of time before he rose to the top echelon of the 100 schools of philosophers. Oblivious to the fact that Zhongqing had been pummeled by Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing, Zhongxian was currently navigating his way through a desert according to the directions given on the jade token. To be honest, he wanted to maintain a low profile. However, it was as if the entire world was denying him of his effort. As the first one to reach the great frontistery of Confucianism in record time, there was no way he would be able to blend in with the crowd anymore. However, this should not pose too much of a problem. As long as his identity as an outsider was not revealed, he would be able to leave as soon as he obtained what he wanted without stirring up too huge a commotion. Who? After flying for some time, a glimmering ray of light suddenly appeared in the distance. Advancing toward the light, Zhongxian soon noticed the presence of a humongous folded space. Shockingly, this folded space was even more stable than the Kungsu domain itself, such that it almost felt as if he was returning to the master-teacher continent. The concentration of spiritual energy was also extremely high, comparable to that of a typical grade 9 spirit-gathering formation. As soon as he stepped into the folded space, his acupoints swiftly opened and began greedily absorbing the spiritual energy. There were innumerable majestic buildings towering all around. They were designed in a traditional architectural style, as if they had been built tens of thousands of years ago. So, this is my destination. Knowing that he had arrived at the great frontistery of Confucianism, Zhongxian lowered himself to the ground. However, before he could land, he suddenly saw a streak of light hurtling in his direction. However, this streak of light did not harness any aggressive intent. It stopped right before Zhongxian, revealing its true form to be a gigantic copper gong. It took its position beneath Zhongxian's feet before exerting a powerful force against him, seemingly trying to prevent him from landing on the ground. Is this a trial as well? Zhongxian frowned. The great frontistery of Confucianism was right beneath him, but a copper gong was trying to push him away. It was apparent that this was something like a trial he had to undergo in order to officially be inaugurated as a student of the academy. However, after all that he had been through thus far, what would a mere copper gong count as? Shaking the excessive thoughts out of his mind, Zhongxian stomped his feet on the ground and exerted his might through the soles of his feet. Hoo! Overpowered by Zhongxian's stomp, the copper gong was sent flying back to the ground. With a satisfied smile, Zhongxian swiftly descended to the ground. A group of middle-aged folks were standing in a row next to the entrance of the great frontistery of Confucianism. They were mixed in gender, but their clothes resembled those worn by Nangong Yuan Feng. It was clear with a glance that they were the scholastic masters of the academy. It'll take at least one day for the examinees to reach here after the examination. Don't you think you are being a little too anxious by coming over right now? A middle-aged lady asked with an unreadable smile. Another middle-aged man glanced at her and replied, I do admit that we are a little anxious, but aren't you the same? If you aren't anxious, why have you come so early on? Well, I'm just here to see if there are any exceptional geniuses in this batch. The middle-aged lady harumphed slightly before turning her head away. Mi Xian, why did you bring the copper gong here? The crowd turned around and saw a middle-aged man walking over with a massive copper gong above his head. It was twirling continuously, sheltering the middle-aged man from the sun rays. The copper gong was likely the artifact that Mi Xian had just forged. However, instead of staying at home to carefully study its purposes, why in the world was he bringing trouble to them instead? Haha, you should also know that my talent lies in strength. I brought this copper gong here to test the new students. Mi Xian laughed heartily. Test the new students? The middle-aged woman frowned. That gong of yours is ridiculously heavy. You aren't thinking of using it to smash our freshmen to death, are you? Of course not. Mi Xian refuted as a mysterious smile crept onto his face. However, I can use the copper gong to push the examinees back. As long as an examinee is able to persevere for 10 seconds against my copper gong, they'll be qualified to become my student and inherit my skills. 10 seconds? Have you not awoken from your dreams yet? Hearing those words, the crowd took in a sharp intake of breath. With Mi Xian's monstrous strength and the copper gong's heavy weight, even they would have trouble coping with the two simultaneously, let alone the Saint Nine Dan to Great Sage One Dan examinees. Wang. Before they could finish their words, there was a slight buzz in the air as a glimmer of light flared in the sky. An examinee has already arrived at the seal. But, didn't the examination start not too long ago? The crowd was stunned. They had expected to wait up to a day at least, but the wait turned out to be shorter than expected. To be able to decipher the formation so quickly, that person must be pretty strong. He will be a good sample for me to test the prowess of my copper gong on. Mi Xian chuckled softly as he leaped into the sky. The gigantic copper gong swiftly flew toward the glimmer of light in the sky, blocking off the entire sun in the blink of an eye. Hong long. But before it could reach its target, a resounding reverberation echoed in the air, and the copper gong suddenly flew back to the ground. Not expecting the copper gong to fly back all of a sudden, Mi Xian narrowed his eyes in alarm. He quickly leaped into the sky to support the copper gong with his strength, but to his horror, it felt as if the weight of the world was pushing the copper gong down to the ground. It was a force far exceeding what he could withstand. Quick, help me. Mi Xian bellowed anxiously as his body was swiftly pushed back to the ground. Realizing the severity of the matter, the other scholastic masters quickly rushed into the air to support the copper gong. Pu, pu, pu. However, as soon as they came into contact with the copper gong, the crushing might pushing them down immediately jolted their bodies, causing fresh blood to spurt from their mouths. Putong, putong. Just like that, the entire group of scholastic masters was forcefully pushed to the ground like a bunch of dumplings. Boom. The copper gong finally landed on the ground with a reverberating metallic gong, and the scholastic masters were pinned underneath, completely disappearing from view. Who? Barely after all of this happened, a figure descended from the sky and scanned his surroundings with a frown on his face. Didn't they tell me that there would be a lot of scholastic masters waiting for me here? Why can't I see anyone? Shaking his head helplessly, Zhongxian proceeded deeper into the great frontistery of Confucianism. Chapter 1885. The ferocious Fan Xiaoshu 1. It seemed like the rules written on the jade token were not to be taken exactly. It was detailed on the jade token that one would be welcomed by the teachers upon arriving at the great frontistery of Confucianism, at which point, one would have a chance to choose among them. However, all that was there to welcome him upon his arrival was a mere copper gong and nothing else. Did I come so quickly that no one was able to react in time? Zhongxian muttered under his breath. In any case, he had no intention of waiting there for them, so he proceeded ahead without any hesitation. This was his first time entering the great frontistery of Confucianism, and he was so overwhelmed by the changes in the spatial laws and the concentration in the spiritual energy that he failed to notice the crowd crushed beneath the copper gong. Besides, he had not exerted too much strength in the earlier stomp, so he did not expect that anyone would end up injured as a result of that. Thus, he had completely failed to notice the bunch of scholastic masters. It was just like how an elephant would not feel an ant struggling beneath it when stepping on it. Su. Shortly after Zhongxian disappeared, Zhongqing appeared before the copper gong. He scanned the surroundings with a confused look in his eyes for a moment before his eyebrows shot up in horror. He quickly grabbed the copper gong and tugged, and it took him a while before he was finally able to lug it away. A bunch of scholastic masters were imprinted messily in the ground. Their faces were ghastly pale, and fresh blood was oozing out from the corners of their mouths. Seeing that everyone was almost on their last breath, Zhongqing exclaimed, "Xian, what in the world happened here?" Those scholastic masters were the strongest experts of the great frontistery of Confucianism. They should have been the ones demonstrating their abilities to attract new students to come under their wing, but why would they end up lying beneath the copper gong like a bunch of dead fish? Did someone just decipher the seal and enter the premises? Xian asked with a tearful look on his face. Yes, Fan Xiaoshu from ancient sage Zikai's lineage, Zhongqing replied before realization struck him, and he widened his eyes in shock. Are you saying that he was the one who caused this? Wait a moment. Tell me what happened here. With an awkward look on his face, Xian began explaining. I took out my copper gong, hoping to find someone who can survive 10 breaths against it and bring him under my wing. So, when I saw that someone was entering the great frontistery of Confucianism, I swiftly brought it out to block his way. However, I didn't think that the other party would stomp down on it so forcefully. In order to prevent it from damaging the buildings around, everyone offered their strength to stop it, but, well, you can see the results for yourself. He sent the copper gong flying. Even with so many of you around, none of you were able to stop him? Zhongqing shook his head in incredulity. But how could that be? Fan Xiaoshu is a Saint 9 Dan pinnacle cultivator. Putting aside the fact that the copper gong was a great sage artifact, it appeared that a stomp from Fan Xiaoshu was already more powerful than a dozen scholastic masters. A Saint 9 Dan pinnacle cultivator being stronger than so many great sage experts. How could that be possible? There's no way Saint 9 Dan cultivators could wield such strength, Xian remarked deeply. In fact, not even great sages would be able to pull something like this off. Such strength can only be wielded by an ancient sage. Ancient sages were extremely dense in weight, such that their body seemed to harness a world in itself. With how swiftly Fan Xiaoshu had been moving earlier, if his body carried the weight of an ancient sage, he would have been able to pull something like that off with a simple stomp. Perhaps, he might not even have been aware of how powerful his stomp was. In any case, one thing was for sure, there was no way a Saint 9 Dan cultivator could draw forth such strength. Hearing those words, Zhongqing frowned. But I checked Fan Xiaoshu earlier, and he is indeed a member from ancient sage Zikai's lineage. Fan Xiaofeng and the others can testify for him too, so it seems unlikely that he would be an impersonator. Furthermore, if an ancient sage barged into the great frontistery of Confucianism, the Great Formation would surely activate, and the hibernating ancient sages would swiftly regain consciousness. However, nothing is happening at all. Similar to the ancient sages of the Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters, the ancient sages of the great frontistery of Confucianism spent most of their time hibernating. It was only in the presence of those who wielded strength equal to them would they be forcefully woken up from their long sleep. The fact that the surroundings were completely silent was more than enough to prove that there were no ancient sages who had breached the barrier and barged into the area. But, if that was not the case, how were they to make sense about what had happened? No matter who Fan Xiaoshu truly is, let's find him before deciding our next move. Knowing that they would only be able to resolve the problem with the person in question present, Mi Xian quickly stowed his copper gong before flying over to the cluster of buildings. Zhongqing and the others followed tightly behind. It did not take long before they saw a silhouette standing in the square, scratching his head in confusion. It was none other than Fan Xiaoshu. Voila! Everyone swiftly descended to the ground and surrounded Fan Xiaoshu tightly. You are. Fan Xiaoshu had a confused look on his face that seemed to say, "What am I doing here?" You are currently at the great frontistery of Confucianism. You cleared the examination with ease, deciphered the formation within a breath, and overpowered all of us simultaneously shortly after entering the premises. A scholastic master among the crowd could not take it anymore. Tell me, just who in the world are you? I am at the great frontistery of Confucianism. Cleared the examination. I have already cleared the examination. Fan Xiaoshu was taken aback as the information plunged him deeper into confusion. Furthermore, I overpowered all of you. What does that mean? Seeing how Fan Xiaoshu was acting as if he had lost his memory, another scholastic master sneered coldly. Don't bother playing the fool. We'll know your true strength with a simple look. With a tap of his finger, a book materialized in the air. It swiftly flipped open before a ray of light descended from it. It was one of the treasures of the great frontistery of Confucianism, the Book of Veracity. It was able to gauge a person's true cultivation and bloodline, and there was no way to possibly deceive it. It had been created through the principles of ancient sage Bo Shong's Eye of Insight, and the book possessed the ability to dispel all falsehood. Wang. Shrouded with a ray of light, the flow of Fan Xiaoshu's zhenqi, the strength of his meridians, and everything else about him was clearly displayed. Even the color of his bloodline and his cultivation was visible to the eye. He's indeed from the lineage of ancient sage Zikai, and there's no doubt that he's a Saint Nine Dan pinnacle cultivator. Hearing those words, the crowd grew even more confused. Under the inspection of the Book of Veracity, it turned out that there was no mistake about the identity of the young man before them. He was Fan Xiaoshu through and through. But, could a Saint Nine Dan pinnacle cultivator really overpower all of them so thoroughly that they were unable to retaliate? Could a Saint Nine Dan cultivator decipher the formation and get in there within a single breath? Could a Saint Nine Dan cultivator teach his peers and grant them the power to eliminate over 1,000 examinees in an intense examination? Allow me to test your strength. While everyone was still trying to figure out what was going on, Zhongqing took a step forward. This time, he suppressed his cultivation down to Great Sage 1 Dan introspective convalescence realm instead of Saint 9 Dan. Even Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing had been able to defeat him earlier. Considering that Fan Xiaoshu was their mentor, raising his cultivation higher than a realm would instead allow him to better control his strength and thus prevent anyone from getting hurt. Hong Long. Not giving Fan Xiaoshu any time to react, Zhongqing smacked his palm down with the might of a falling comet and the raging tides of a river. Even though he had suppressed his cultivation to the introspective convalescence realm, the power that he displayed still made everyone's breathing hastened in alarm as they subconsciously backed away. Fan Xiaoshu's face paled in fright before this tremendous might, such that his body trembled uncontrollably. His memory only went to the point where he was still at the foot of the mountain, waiting for the examination to begin. Then, when he suddenly came to again, he was already standing in this square. To make matters worse, a scholastic master even made a move against him without any hesitation. What the heck was going on? Knowing that there was no time to think in this situation, he hurriedly backed away. He could tell in an instant that the strength wielded by the other party was not something that he could possibly stand up against. If he did not dodge, there was a good chance that he would be smashed into a meat biscuit. Su. However, before he could even process what was going on, his body had already flown back. It was just an instant, but his body had already flown back 800 meters, almost as if he had teleported away. Boom! Zhongqing's attack landed on the ground, creating a depression in the middle of the square. Not expecting that he would be able to move with such swiftness, Fan Xiaoshu was stunned. What is going on? He staggered weakly on the spot, and a moment of imbalance caused him to fall on his bottom onto the ground. He had been thinking of simply retreating a single step, and under normal circumstances, it would already have been a formidable feat if he was able to retreat 10 meters away. Yet, he had actually covered 800 meters in a single step. How in the world did he do it? Where am I? Who am I? Fan Xiaoshu fell into confusion once more. Chapter 1886 The Ferocious Fan Xiaoshu 2 This movement technique. Mi Xian and the others narrowed their eyes in shock. They could tell that the person standing before them had only used the strength of an ordinary Saint Nine Dan, but a slight maneuver from him was already more than enough to outrun a great Sage 1 Dan cultivator. The speed that he was able to travel at was terrifying. On the other hand, Zhongqing was not too surprised to see that his attack had failed to land. He had been unable to defeat Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing when his cultivation was suppressed to the same level as them, so there was nothing surprising about the person who had groomed them being able to dodge his attack easily. Zhongqing exhaled deeply before kicking off the ground once more. His movements were flurried and random, like a raging blizzard. No matter how Fan Xiaoshu moved around, he found that he was unable to shake Zhongqing off his trail, leaving him feeling completely bewildered. This is the unique technique of scholastic master Zhongqing, World of Blizzard, Mi Xian remarked grimly. Putting aside opponents of the same tier, with his current fighting prowess, he would be able to overpower even great Sage 2 Den experts with ease. Mi Xian was one of the few cultivators whose abilities were heavily skewed toward his immense might. Playing on his core strength, he capitalized on his superior might to overwhelm everything that stood in his way, so the battle techniques that he practiced tended to be simple in nature. Forming a stark contrast to him was Zhongqing, whose expertise lay in pulling off delicate movements to pressure his opponent. The World of Blizzard, which he was executing at the moment, was incredibly confusing, such that it left one's eyes blurring in confusion. Had Mi Xian been in Fan Xiaoshu's position, he knew that the only possible move that he could have made at that moment was to run away. The others nodded in agreement upon hearing those words. With deep frowns on their foreheads, they seemed to be deep in thought to figure out a way to overcome the powerful World of Blizzard, but it did not take them long to shake their heads helplessly. They all came to the same conclusion in the end. Unless their cultivation was decisively above Zhongqing's, there was nothing they could do. With such a thought in mind, they quickly turned their gazes toward the Saint Nine Dan young man and saw the bewildered look on his face. It seemed as if the young man was at a complete loss as to what he could do as well. However, his body suddenly jolted as a thought surfaced in his mind, and with a nimble forward step, he entered into the midst of the other party's area of attack. Surprisingly, even though he had walked into Zhongqing's field, none of the attacks seemed to land on him. With a simple wave of his hand, the snow seemed to be pulled along with him, swiftly congregating to form a massive snowball. Pang! Zhongqing was knocked into the distance as crimson blood spurted furiously from his lips. He actually lost in a single move. This. The scholastic masters in the area widened their eyes in shock. They were all taken aback by what they had just seen. As experts of the great frontistery of Confucianism, they were more than capable of defeating multiple students simultaneously even with their cultivation suppressed. But that young man had actually managed to defeat Zhongqing that easily. They had witnessed the duel from the start to the end, and the moves that Fan Xiaoshu had executed looked ordinary on the surface. Yet, for some reason, as if they embodied a deeper ingenuity, those moves somehow managed to easily breach Zhongqing's defenses, rendering him completely powerless. Even if they were in Zhongqing's place, they did not think that they would have fared any better than him. To think that it was possible for one's combat techniques to reach such a level. Just who in the world was Fan Xiaoshu's teacher? While the scholastic masters were taken aback by what they had witnessed, Fan Xiaoshu was also staring at his palms with incredulous eyes. All he remembered was someone calling him away while he was waiting at the foot of the mountain for the examination to start, then everything had gone blank afterward. By the time he came to once more, He was already in the great frontistery of Confucianism. He felt that it was unreasonable for Zhongqing to abruptly have made a move on an ordinary student just like that, and he had already been prepared to be completely destroyed. Yet, a memory had suddenly surfaced in his mind in this moment of distress. This memory contained some insights regarding combat techniques. He had simply moved in accordance to the principles stated by those combat techniques, and before he knew it, he had already defeated the seemingly unreachable Zhongqing. Just as Fan Xiaoshu was trying to make sense of the ridiculous situation that was happening to him, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "I am Zhong Xian. I borrowed your body for a moment to resolve some urgent matters. I have given you a memory fragment containing insights to combat techniques as compensation for my offense, and I hope that you will keep my identity a secret in return." He recognized the voice to be from the person who had knocked him out back then. Zhong Xian. If his memory could allow me to defeat even a scholastic master with ease, does this mean that he's an ancient sage? Fan Xiaoshu's heart jolted in alarm. To be able to leave a sliver of his memory in his heart without inflicting the slightest harm to him, this was something that only veteran ancient sages could pull off. Even the ancient sage of their lineage was unable to pull it off. He could hardly begin to imagine just how powerful this person known as Zhong Xian was. If that Zhong Xian person willed it, he would be able to destroy him with just a mere thought, but he had chosen not to do so. Not only so, the other party had even compensated him. From this, it could be deduced that this Zhong Xian person was not an evil person at heart. Since that was the case, regardless of why the other party wanted to come to the great frontistery of Confucianism, it should be fine for him to keep it a secret. Besides, matters concerning ancient sages could only be resolved by ancient sages themselves. As a Saint Nine Dan cultivator, no one would believe him even if he really spoke about it. Thus, he quickly assimilated the piece of memory that the other party had left in his mind before turning to the scholastic masters before him with an excited grin on his face. "Do any of you still want to test my cultivation? Make your move. If you feel insecure, I don't mind facing all of you at once." He had just tried out the battle technique earlier, and it had been proven to work. This would be a good opportunity for him to test the extent of his improvement. Seeing how arrogant a mere freshman was, Mi Xian and the others looked at one another for a moment before taking a step forward. 30 breaths later, they were all floored. Fan Xiaoshu stared at his trembling hands with reddened eyes, unable to believe the miracle that had just befallen him. His talent and strength could only have been said to be average among the youths of the 100 schools of philosophers. Under normal circumstances, it would have been difficult for him to clear the examination. Who could have known that he would catch the eye of an ancient sage and be imparted top-notch combat techniques that allowed him to overpower even the scholastic masters? This was an accomplishment that he would not have dared dream of in the past. If even a sliver of that ancient sage's combat techniques could raise his fighting prowess by such a degree, he shuddered to imagine just how powerful the ancient sage himself was. I wonder who this ancient sage Zhong Xian is. Fan Xiaoshu looked into the distant sky as a towering, heroic figure took form in his mind. There was no Zhong among the 100 schools of philosophers, so the other party was likely an outsider. Then again, there was no way that he could verify his identity, so there was no use thinking too deeply into it. All in all, the only thing that was important to him was that he had learned the combat techniques from ancient sage Zhong Xian and was now indebted to him. You shall be the one and only teacher I truly acknowledge from this day onward, and nothing will change that determination of mine. Fan Xiaoshu swore deep in his heart. Who? A figure was slowly walking leisurely through the great frontistery of Confucianism. There was a huge crowd around him, but not a single person seemed to notice his presence. The surrounding space had been distorted in a manner that prevented the slightest hint of light from falling upon him. This figure was none other than Zhong Xian. His goal was to enter the great frontistery of Confucianism without causing too huge a ruckus, and since he had achieved his goal, there was no longer any need for him to disguise himself. Thus, he had released Fan Xiaoshu not too long after arriving at the great frontistery of Confucianism. Of course, he did not forget to compensate Fan Xiaoshu fairly for the matter. Having inherited the full heritage of the Soul Oracles, he was able to pull off a task as difficult as transplanting a sliver of his memories without harming the other party with ease. As for how much Fan Xiaoshu would benefit from receiving a sliver of his memories, that would not be his problem to worry about anymore. He had already given the other party the opportunity, and whether Fan Xiaoshu himself was able to grasp it or not was up to him. That being said, while transplanting a sliver of his memories seemed to be the more efficient way to gain power, his foundation would not be as stable as Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing's, who had gained their insights through practical experience and self-discovery. In other words, even though Fan Xiaoshu's fighting prowess would likely be greater Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing for the time being, as time passed, it was likely that Fan Xiaofeng and Fan Xiaoxing would eventually surpass him. Of course, he would have likely left the Kungsu domain by then after uncovering Kong Shi's secrets. Putting aside the miscellaneous thoughts in his mind, Zhong Xian continued ahead. He strolled around the city-like great frontistery of Confucianism for a moment before finally setting his gaze upon a stately room. Sage Ancestral Hall. If Kong Shi has hidden any secrets in the great frontistery of Confucianism, they will likely be here, Zhong Xian thought. What was standing before him was a unique building that was absent in the Master-Teacher pavilions of the Master-Teacher continent, the Sage Ancestral Hall. Placed within the Sage Ancestral Hall were a sculpture of Kong Shi himself and his individual possessions. It was a room used specifically for paying respects to him. Of the entire great frontistery of Confucianism, this was the place that had the greatest relevance to Kong Shi. Thus, Zhong Xian took a deep breath before making his way over to the Sage Ancestral Hall. However, before he could reach his destination, a ray of light suddenly descended from the sky. It seemed like a formation had seen through the distortions of space that he had created around himself and discovered his presence. Hong Long. Following which, a massive palm tore through space to slam down upon him. The surrounding space swiftly collapsed under the tremendous might, and it felt as if the entire Kungsu domain would burst as a result of the force. Chapter 1887 Sage Ancestral Hall. Zhong Xian did not think that he would be discovered even though he had hidden fairly well. He took a step back before pushing back against the palm with a powerful punch of his own. Even though he had not achieved a breakthrough to Ancient Sage, his fighting prowess was already on par with Blood Reincarnation Realm experts. As Zhanqi surged through his meridians, a devastating force was swiftly gathering at the tips of his knuckles. Hong! As the fist and palm collided with one another, Zhong Xian's body jolted a little. To his surprise, that palm strike was not any weaker than his fist. It also harnessed the might of a Blood Reincarnation Realm expert. I mustn't drag things out. Zhong Xian's motive for going to the Kungsu domain was to uncover Kong Shi's trail after capturing a deity from the Azure. His goal had never been to cause trouble, and in order to avoid unnecessary complications, it would be best for him to end this battle as quickly as possible. Otherwise, once the ancient sages of the 100 schools of philosophers noticed his presence, things could really get troublesome. With a flick of his wrist, the Dragonbone Divine Spear materialized in Zhong Xian's grasp. Gathering the full might of his body, he drove it right toward the palm in the sky. Despite the incredible momentum of the spear, it left nothing more than a slight indentation in the surrounding space, almost reminiscent of a needle piercing into one's skin. The spear had retained all of the energy within it, to the extent that even the crowd not too far away would not imagine that two ancient sages were colliding with one another just 10 meters away from them. Peng! With the powerful drive behind it, the Dragonbone Divine Spear overpowered the palm and pushed it back. As if recognizing that it was not a match for Zhong Xian, the palm also retreated back into the formation. Having overcome this obstacle, Zhong Xian swiftly made his way into the Sage Ancestral Hall. The first thing that came into his mind upon entering the stately room was the humongous Kong Shi sculpture located at the center of the room. Standing in front of him was a warrior dressed in gold from top to bottom. This warrior was glaring at him with killing intent rippling in his eyes. There was a cut at the center of its palm, which indicated that it was the opponent who had made a move on Zhong Xian just a moment earlier. This is a golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy. Zhong Xian frowned in bewilderment. He had thought that the person who had attacked him earlier would be an expert from the great frontistery of Confucianism protecting the sage ancestral hall, but it was only a warrior transformed from calligraphy. This was not the first time that he had encountered a golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy. He had come by them previously at ancient sage Ran Chio's ancient domain. To think that it's possible for calligraphy to harness the might of an ancient sage 3-dan cultivator. Was this golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy left behind by Kong Shi himself? Zhong Xian wondered. There was no doubt that Kong Shi was the strongest person who had ever walked on the master-teacher continent, but he had not thought that the other party had actually been that powerful. Even a single calligraphed character from him wielded strength that was comparable to the current him. If Kong Shi wrote down a bunch of words, there would practically be nothing in this world that could stop him anymore. But an instant after this thought formulated in Zhong Xian's mind, he swiftly shook his head and denied that notion. It was easier said than done to produce a golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy. Not only was it extremely testing on the skills and state of mind of the painter, it was also highly demanding on one's zhenqi and blood essence for nourishment. Given Zhong Xian's current capabilities, he would only be able to create golden warriors of Mentor's calligraphy at the level of sempiternal realm cultivators, and his limit was 3 of them. Anything more than that would be pushing it too far. But no matter how powerful it is nothing more than a character, Zhong Xian muttered beneath his breath. He released his spiritual perception to swiftly scan the surroundings, and he heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that the earlier battle had not caught anyone's attention. Turning his gaze back to the golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy, he pushed his right leg against the ground and dashed forward, piercing his spear in the direction of the golden warrior. Through concentrating his zhenqi at the tip of the spear, a swiftly revolving sphere of energy swiftly formed in front of him. His spearmanship was in harmony with the world. Simple was its form, but versatility was its core. The unpredictable trajectory of his spear made it extremely difficult to defend against it. In order to end this battle as quickly as possible, Zhong Xian chose not to hold back at all. Gathering all of the strength at his disposal, he exerted a might that was almost comparable to a dimension-shatterer realm cultivator. In less than 2 breaths, the golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy was shattered, reduced to an ink character on the wall behind the sculpture. Confucianism. Seeing that the character had not made any move after the earlier offense, Zhong Xian walked up to the sculpture of Kong Shi and bowed deeply as a show of respect before looking around the area. It was likely that the golden warrior of Mentor's calligraphy from earlier was a trial that those who wanted to enter the sage ancestral hall would have to go through, similar to what had happened in ancient sage Ran Chio's ancient domain. Only those who had defeated it would be qualified to explore the premises. The room was mainly empty except for the sculpture at the center. Thus, Zhong Xian walked up to the side door and saw a corridor beyond it. The corridor was wide and spacious, and there were numerous tablets floating alongside it. This is Kong Shi's entire life story? Zhong Xian's eyes lit up in excitement. The floating tablets were inscribed with the records of Kong Shi's life, detailing everything that had happened since his birth. Laying his eyes on one of the floating tablets, Zhong Xian felt as if his soul had traveled through space-time to witness the grand life that Kong Shi had lived. Unlike the usual depictions of his life, Kong Shi was not a carnate saint. No matter how one looked at it, he was an ordinary individual. The only thing that was noteworthy was his deep interest in books and sharp wits. But a day suddenly came when he deviated from his ordinary life. It was as if an epiphany had suddenly struck him, causing his cultivation to surge. Within the short span of a year, he achieved a breakthrough beyond Fighter 9-dan, Transcendent Mortal 9-dan, and even Saint 9-dan. In terms of progress, Kong Shi was no slower than him. It was still the era where the otherworldly demonic tribe ruled over the master-teacher continent back then, and the humans lived under oppression. Along his growth, Kong Shi's footsteps never halted. He fought country after country, salvaging mankind from the claws of the otherworldly demonic tribe. At the same time, he spread his teachings and ideals while taking in students. Before long, the master-teacher pavilion that they knew today was established. Feeling threatened by Kong Shi's presence, the otherworldly demonic tribe launched an ambush on Kong Shi and his disciples, trapping them in Chensi AI for many months. Many thought that Kongsha was done for, but in that crucial period, he created the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn and successfully achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage. That freed him from the danger that he was in, and he even successfully assassinated Vicious. Soon enough, the otherworldly demonic tribe was driven back and sealed within the otherworldly battlefield, thus liberating mankind once and for all. From the looks of it, it seems like Kongsha's breakthrough to ancient sage wasn't just an ordinary comprehension of temporal laws. Zhongxian pondered as he followed Kongsha's journey through his life. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn contained the secrets of time. Zhongxian himself had been to the Temple of Confucius, and the flow of time in that folded space was indeed different from that of the world outside. Ancient sage Ran Qiu's breakthrough was built upon his spearmanship, and ancient sage Qiu Wu's breakthrough came from his deep comprehension of spatial laws. All along, he had thought that what Kongsha had grasped in his breakthrough to ancient sage were the temporal laws, but it seemed like there was more to it. The founder of the Zhong clan was a person who had comprehended the time quintessence and successfully achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage based on it. There was no doubt that he was a powerful individual, but he still came nowhere close in comparison to the world's teacher. Harboring doubts in his heart, Zhongxian moved on to the other stone tablets. After being driven away to the otherworldly battlefield, the otherworldly demonic tribe was indignant and craved vengeance. Thus, they summoned a deity in hopes of turning the tables, but the deity was instead captured by Kongsha. Watching up to this point, Zhongxian's breathing hastened a little. His goal here was to uncover the encounter that Kongsha had with the captured deity, and the answer was right before him. Kongsha took the deity away from the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, the safest place on the Master Teacher continent, and brought him to a rather remote location. This remote location was a barren land, and the spiritual energy was thin. There were no decent buildings or cities to be seen. There was a sudden jump in the story. It was hard to tell whether the deity had been killed or something, but he vanished without a trace. At the same time, Kongsha seemed to have sustained some injuries, so he chose to stop by the area temporarily to recuperate. On the very last tablet, it was detailed that Kongsha entered a mini-world. If his deduction was correct, this mini-world referred to the Kungsu domain where the 100 schools of philosophers resided. Kungsu domain. Could it be that? Zhongxian took a closer look at the remote location where Kongsha had taken the deity to, and his eyebrows suddenly started twitching. He actually recognized this remote location. It was none other than the current Tianxian kingdom. Chapter 1888. Meeting ancient sage Yang Qing once more. Could it be that the Kungsu domain wasn't created by Kongsha? Zhongxian pondered. He had known prior to coming here that the 100 schools of philosophers had departed from the Master Teacher continent to reside in a mini-world that Kongsha had created. This was also why he had not been surprised when he saw the Kungsu domain after breaking the seal. However, the stone tablet right before him was telling him that this was not the case. This mini-world seemed to have existed since time immemorial. It was not one of Kongsha's creations. The records of Kongsha also stopped here. Could it be that the Kungsu domain had some links with the Azure? With a deep frown, Zhongxian proceeded ahead. Beyond the corridor of floating stone tablets was a majestic hall with walls filled with murals. Those murals depicted the contributions made by the generations of experts from the 100 schools of philosophers after entering this mini-world. Just as he had guessed, the green sprout wheat had indeed been nurtured by an ancient sage, but it was not by ancient sage Zikai as he had previously guessed. Instead, it had been completed by one of his descendants. It had taken tens of thousands of years of careful modifications before it was refined into a miraculous crop, allowing even non-cultivators to reach the level of Zongsha realm upon maturity. Of course, its effects did not stop just there. Through the enhancements of their constitution, it also allowed cultivators to advance through the ranks faster than usual. Browsing through the murals, Zhongxian felt even more confused. There were no more records regarding Kongsha from that point onward. It was as if Kongsha had completely disappeared from the world, such that there was no more news regarding him. He walked to the very end and circled the area once more, but there was nothing to be seen. He could not help but sigh helplessly. It seemed like he had reached a bottleneck in his investigations. Shaking his head, he was just about to leave the sage ancestral hall to investigate the other locations of the great frontistery of Confucianism when he suddenly noticed something and flitted to a corner of the room. At the same time, he swiftly set up over a dozen seals on him, causing all traces of his presence to fade into obscurity. Voila! Barely a second after he had hidden himself, the sound of footsteps echoed in the air. Several people were making their way into the sage ancestral hall. Zhong Xian secretly peered over from his hiding spot. The person standing at the forefront of the group was surprisingly a familiar face. Ancient sage Yang Qing. The group that was following behind him also struck a chord in his memories. They had participated in the encirclement of Sovereign Chen Yongbak at the Temple of Confucius. With his current strength and grasp of spatial laws, as long as he did not intentionally release his aura or communicate with anyone, he was able to completely conceal his presence even from ancient sages. They don't seem to be doing too well. When Zhong Xian first met them back at the Temple of Confucius, they had emanated the inviolable airs of an ancient sage, commanding an aura that forced others to bow to their authority. However, at this very moment, they felt like a great tree that was swiftly withering away. Be it their appearance or the aura that they were emanating, it felt as if strength and vitality were swiftly seeping away from them. This was something that he had felt from Zhong Hongtian back then when his lifespan reached its limits. I wonder what's wrong. Zhong Xian looked on contemplatively. It was true that the battle against Sovereign Chen Yong was intense, and many of them had sustained significant injuries throughout the course of the battle. However, their conditions were nowhere as severe as Zhong Hongtian's, and they should have been able to recover to their peak with sufficient time. Given so, how did they land themselves in their current state within a short few months? This was especially so for ancient sage Yang Qing. His face reflected infirmity, the vigorous spirit in his eyes had dimmed out, and his movements were slightly stiff. It was almost as if he was about to meet his end. Cough cough. Just as Zhong Xian was trying to figure out what was going on, coughs echoed in the air, and fresh blood seeped from the corners of ancient sage Yang Qing's lips. Yang Qing. An ancient sage behind him looked over worriedly. I can still hold on. Ancient sage Yang Qing raised his hand and replied feebly. Gathering the last bit of his strength left, he turned around and said, let's begin after paying our respects. Are you certain that you want to do this? There's no other choice. This is the mission entrusted to the 100 schools of philosophers. We can't shirk from our responsibility, ancient sage Yang Qing replied with an unreadable look on his face. Shaking his head, he walked up to Kongsha's sculpture and kneeled down. The other ancient sages quickly followed suit. To the venerated world's teacher, I am the 73rd generation of offspring of ancient sage Zi Yuan, Yang Qing. I have heeded your teachings and held steadfast in my duties over the years. There has not been a day since when I have slacked. With the appearance of the Temple of Confucius, I know that we are reaching the breaking point that our predecessors warned us about, and it's time for us to do our part for the world. We are willing to offer our lives to the world, so if you are able to hear our prayers from above, I implore you to look after our clans after we are gone. The words spoken by ancient sage Yang Qing was solemn, as if he was prepared to meet his end. Kongsha's sculpture simply stood silently on the spot, leaving a deafening silence in the air. After praying, the group got to their feet. Somehow, ancient sage Yang Qing looked a little feebler than before as he said, let's go. Helplessness was reflected in the eyes of those high and mighty ancient sages, but they chose not to say a word at all as they followed quietly behind ancient sage Yang Qing. Breaking point. Offer their lives. Shortly after the ancient sages of the 100 schools of philosophers took their leave, Zhong Xian removed the seals around him as he lowered his head contemplatively. Under normal circumstances, those ancient sages should have returned to hibernation, so why did they suddenly pay a visit to this sage ancestral hall and speak such words? Furthermore, what was with the injuries inflicted on their bodies? The last thing he heard about them was that they were busy repairing the Temple of Confucius. Were there some dangers involved in the repairs of the Temple of Confucius? Harboring deep bewilderment in his heart, Zhong Xian quickly followed them out. Dragonbone Divine Spear, I need you to conceal my aura for me. The dragonbone divine spear swiftly warped into a belt, which wrapped itself around Zhongxian's body. In the blink of an eye, it looked as if Zhongxian had contracted a fair bit. Not even the slightest hint of aura could be felt from him, such that even blood reincarnation realm experts would be unable to sense his presence. Even though Zhongxian's current fighting prowess was comparable to blood reincarnation realm experts, he still had not taken the last step to achieving a breakthrough to Ancient Sage. As such, his control over his powers was a little lacking. Without layers and layers of barriers, he was not confident in keeping his aura sufficiently under wraps to track the most powerful experts on the Master-Teacher continent without alarming them. On the other hand, the Dragonbone Divine Spear had devoured the dragon blood and was only a step away from achieving a full breakthrough to the Dimension Shatterer realm. In terms of prowess, it was even stronger than Ancient Sage Yang Qing. With its help, it was unlikely that those ancient sages would be able to notice him. After leaving the Sage Ancestral Hall, Zhongxian saw Ancient Sage Yang Qing leaping into the sky and tearing open space to travel somewhere else. Zhongxian quickly followed behind them. Some time later, they arrived at an elevated platform amid a remote mountain range. The sky above was completely empty. There were no clouds nor even any hint of blueness to be seen. It was an empty void. The flow of space in here is extremely fast, Zhongxian noted. To the untrained eye, this place seemed to be extremely peaceful. However, as someone who had grasped the spatial quintessence, he could sense that this space was flowing extremely quickly, resulting in massive changes every passing second. It felt as if the entire area would collapse soon under the strain. That was not all. Beyond the void, there was a blood-curdling sensation that seemed to phase one's soul directly. "Let's begin," Ancient Sage Yang Qing urged after getting into position. Nodding in agreement, the group of ancient sages began to drive their zhongqi. However, they were disrupted by a sudden gale. Two silhouettes were swiftly making their way over. Noting the presence of the two uninvited guests, the ancient sages quickly halted their actions and turned to look. Naturally, Zhongxian did the same. Who? The two guests landed on the ground. The first person was a young lady that appeared to be in her early 20s. She had a slender figure and pitch-black hair that extended down to his waist, and she gave out a delicate impression. Her eyes carried deep anxiety that reflected her trepidation toward what was about to come. There was a green-robed young man in his early 20s as well standing behind her. Zhongxian happened to know him. He was one of the offspring of the 100 schools of philosophers who had fought with him over the prime amulet back in ancient sage Ran Qiu's ancient domain, Yang Shui. "What are you two doing here?" Ancient sage Yang Qing asked with a livid look on his face upon seeing the two of them. The young lady took a step forward and said with conviction, "As a descendant of Kongsha, how can I possibly remain uninvolved when such a matter has happened?" "A descendant of Kongsha?" Zhongxian widened his eyes. "Is she Kongsha Yarrow?" Chapter 1889. Yang Hui's corpse. He had heard far too many people raising the name Kongsha Yarrow before him. She was rumored to be the strongest expert of the 100 schools of philosophers, possessing superior talents in cultivation. It was said that she did not pale in comparison to him. There was a time when he had thought that Luo Ruoxin's true identity was Kongsha Yarrow, but his deductions had fallen through. Seeing the person whom he had heard so much about in the flesh, he could not help but take a closer look to assess her closely. It had to be said that the rumors were not completely unfounded. Not only was she blessed with impeccable looks, she also emanated an ethereal aura reminiscent of a deity. It was hard to pull one's gaze away from her. Luo Ruoxin carried a lofty aura that pushed others away from her, making her hard to approach. On the other hand, Kongsha Yarrow carried an aura that induced others to trust and submit to her, the aura of a natural leader. Many would willingly lay down their lives for her under her command. Formidable master teachers are able to draw the gazes of others with just their presence. This is the first time I have seen someone who is able to bring this quality out to such an extent. It seems like Kongsha Yarrow has truly inherited Kongsha's bloodline, Zhongxian thought. Kongsha's lineage was truly extraordinary. In terms of cultivation, Kongsha Yarrow was at sempiternal realm consummation as well, the same as him. She had not achieved a breakthrough to ancient sage yet, but the aura in her body felt condensed and heavy. Most likely, her fighting prowess exceeded that of ordinary ancient sages. This was really the first time that Zhongxian had seen someone whose talents were at a level similar to his. Since you are aware that you are a descendant of Kongshe, you should also know of the responsibilities that you have to shoulder. We can afford to lose our lives, but you have to remain alive regardless of what it takes. The descendants of Kongshe don't fear death. Kongshe Yarrow replied in determination. I carry the purest bloodline of Kongshe within me, so I'm the best candidate to stabilize the space here. There's no point arguing about this matter. Seeing that Kong Xiao's mind was set, ancient sage Yang Qing was silent for a moment before sighing deeply. Xiao, you are still young, and there's a long way ahead of you. I am just a pile of old bones who is going to reach the limits of his lifespan soon. There's no need for you to give up your life for this. This matter isn't open for negotiation. As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand. A sudden outburst of energy shrouded Kong Xiao and sealed her on the spot, rendering her unable to move. Ancient sage Yang Qing. Not expecting ancient sage Yang Qing to make such a move, Kong Xiao exclaimed in a fluster. A mixture of panic and anxiety welling up in her caused tears to brim in her eyes. But unmoved by Kong Xiao's expression, ancient sage Yang Qing turned to Yang Shui and sternly commanded, "Take care of her well. Even at the expense of your life, you can't allow any harm to fall upon her." "Yes." Yang Shui replied resolutely. Ancient sage Yang Qing closed his eyes for a short moment before looking at the other ancient sages and nodding. "Let's begin." As he spoke, a decisive and powerful aura gushed forth from his body. With the other ancient sages around cooperating with him, they swiftly formed a massive pillar of light that surged right into the void. The rumbling of thunder echoed from the void in space, and innumerable powerful surges of energy clawed at the rift, seemingly intending to climb their way out to unleash their horrors upon this world. Is this the Zhenqi of slaughter of the otherworldly demonic tribe? Feeling this aura, Zhongxian was taken aback for a little. He pondered deeply for a moment before shaking his head. No, that's not it. It feels even heavier than the Zhenqi of slaughter, almost like mercury. My meridians wouldn't be able to take the burden if I absorbed it. Zhongxian's face turned even more grim at the realization. The energy beyond the rift was similar to the Zhenqi of slaughter, but it took on an even more bizarre form. Even with his current strength, he dared not to absorb it into his body recklessly. Normal spiritual energy was lighter than water, so the meridians were still able to withstand its flow without falling apart. However, the same could not be said about the mercury-like energy above him. While it was also fluid, the chances were that its weight would crush his meridians and destroy his body from within if he dared absorb it. This very energy was raging behind the rift, threatening to pour forth upon the world at any moment. If it poured out of the rift, all of the cultivators of the 100 schools of philosophers could very well explode on the spot once they came into contact with the energy. What's going on here? Zhongxian was horrified. It was as if he was being exposed to a completely different side of the world that he had never seen before. If the seal failed to ward off the energy, it could possibly spell the end of the Kungsu domain. Stand your ground and fend it off. While Zhongxian was still trying to make sense of what was going on, ancient sage Yang Qing slowly rose into the air. His hair flew around messily under the furious tug of the air currents. He was serving as the very center of the formation created by the group of ancient sages, and he was responsible for channeling their energy toward the void. Thunder growled forbiddingly in the air as the pressure from the void grew heavier and heavier. It was almost as if the sky was going to fall upon them. At the same time, the faces of the ancient sages turned more and more severe as their black hair swiftly turned white. They are putting their life force on the line to seal the rift. It was no wonder they had aged so much within less than 3 months. It turned out that they had been expending their life force in order to maintain the seal before them. The lightning in the air grew more and more concentrated, as if signifying the rage of the heavens. Ancient sage Yang Qing bit his finger and flicked his fresh blood toward the depths of the void. Following which, a humongous coffin vaguely emerged from the void. The appearance of the coffin caused the rift to shrink a little, and the mercury-like power that was going to descend upon the world also cowered fearfully in its face. At the same time, the pressure crushing down on the crowd lessened significantly. That coffin. Zhong Xian thought with a frown. It was already bewildering for there to be a coffin hidden in the midst of the void, but what was even more shocking to Zhong Xian was the design of the coffin. To his astonishment, it was identical to the one that he had encountered prior to entering the Kungsu domain, the one that ancient sage Ran Qiu's corpse was stored in. That coffin seems to be serving as the crux of the seal, Zhong Xian swiftly analyzed. This coffin was not made for the sole purpose of containing a corpse, rather, it seemed to be a powerful artifact that was used to sustain the formation, sealing away the rifts in the air. It was due to the power of the coffin that the mercury-like power was unable to descend from the heavens and wreak havoc. Most likely, there's an ancient sage whose strength is on par with ancient sage Ran Qiu within the coffin, Zhong Xian deduced. The fact that the formation was able to prevent the mercury-like energy from descending evidenced its incredible prowess. Serving as the crux of the formation, there was no way the person within the coffin could be ordinary. The seal at the entrance of Kungsu domain used ancient sage Ran Qiu's body as its crux, and even the Dimension Shatterer Realm Vicious had been unable to break it open. Considering how this formation was even more powerful, it was hard to imagine how powerful the person had been back in his prime. Jia. The coffin in the sky jolted intensely, and several slight cracks appeared by its sides. Open. Along with the appearance of the cracks, veins popped out on ancient sage Yang Qing's temples. He swiftly sent a fresh stream of his blood toward the cracks of the coffin in order to further drive its opening. However, due to the severe loss of blood, his face was turning as pale as a sheet of paper. His body trembled uncontrollably from his overexertion, and his skin quickly lost its suppleness, turning loose and wrinkly. It was only an instant, but he looked as if he had aged another 10 years. Boom. The cracks on the coffin grew larger and larger under the influx of ancient sage Yang Qing's blood, and soon enough, there was a massive explosion. Amid floating dust, a towering silhouette emerged from the coffin. Just as Zhong Xian had guessed, there was indeed an ancient sage corpse placed inside the coffin. This silhouette was dressed in a flowing long robe, and he had smooth facial features that created a calming appearance. Even though he had been stored in the coffin for tens of thousands of years, his body looked no different from the time of his death. There was no hint of decomposition at all. Could this person possibly be? Looking at the corpse and ancient sage Yang Qing, a person's name surfaced in Zhong Xian's mind, and his body stiffened. Ancient sage Zi Yuan. Yang Hui. Chapter 1890. Kong Shiyao's capabilities. He had never seen ancient sage Zi Yuan's sculpture before, but that did not mean that he knew nothing about this renowned ancient sage at all. Ancient sage Zi Yuan was renowned for being Kong Shi's first direct disciple. While his fighting prowess was beneath that of ancient sage Ran Qiu, his reputation and prestige far exceeded that of the rest of the 72 sages. Putting aside his honorable character and exceptional proficiency in many different fields, he was also the person who had helped Kong Shi compile the heritage of numerous occupations and standardized the ranking system. In contrast to the sharp aura that ancient sage Ran Qiu commanded, the corpse before him seemed to emanate an aura more like the all-encompassing ocean that accepted the currents from hundreds of tributaries and assimilated them. It was through tapping into this superior strength that the mercury-like energy had not been able to breach the formation to seep into the master-teacher continent thus far. Most likely, ancient sage Zi Yuan was the only one among the 72 sages who was capable of this feat. Besides, the fact that ancient sage Yang Qing's blood was required to activate the coffin and nourish the corpse made it very apparent who was within it. First ancient sage Ran Qiu's corpse, and now ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse, Zhong Xian thought as he trembled a little. These two ancient sages were figures whose names still resounded across the master-teacher continent even after so many years. He had thought that they would have left the master-teacher continent together with Kong Shi, but who could have known that he would find their corpses there? Tribute. Ancient sage Yang Qing bellowed deafeningly as his body began to break apart like a smashed ceramic vase. Blood spurted out from his veins and arteries before surging toward the corpse in a steady current. Taking in the blood, The stiffness in the corpse seemed to lessen, making it seem as though it would come to life at any moment. At the same time, the formation also strengthened significantly. The rifts that had been on the verge of bursting open earlier swiftly stabilized and mended themselves. Ancient sage Yang Qing originates from ancient sage Zi Yuan's lineage, so the latter's blood flows through his veins. He's trying to use his blood to augment and sustain ancient sage Zi Yuan's strength so as to strengthen the formation, sealing away the rifts. Zhong Xian finally understood what was going on. It was no wonder ancient sage Yang Qing had spoken of sacrificing himself earlier. The formation had come from his predecessor, and the blood of those from his lineage would be more effective in stabilizing the formation once more. Of course, considering that Kong Shiyaro possessed Kong Shi's bloodline, her blood would likely have an exceptional effect on ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse, perhaps even exceeding that of ancient sage Yang Qing. However, considering how valued Kong Shiyaro was among the 100 schools of philosophers, there was no way ancient sage Yang Qing would allow her to sacrifice herself. It seems like everything is settling down. Under the influx of blood, the seal swiftly stabilized, and the pressure from the void gradually vanished. Ancient sage Yang Qing heaved a sigh of relief. The current him had expended most of his blood, he had already struck his limit. It was only a matter of time before the last bit of vitality in his body dried up, and he would come crashing back down to the ground as a lifeless corpse. Realizing this reality, Kong Shiyaro pounded desperately on the seal that had trapped her with tears in her eyes. However, with her strength, she was completely powerless to change anything. At the same time, Yang Shui turned his head away and averted his gaze, not wanting to see the downfall of the man whom he had respected his entire life. Hong Long Long. It was at this moment that things started going awry. As the formation grew stronger and stronger under the influx of ancient sage Yang Qing's blood, it looked as if the sealing would be completed very soon. However, at that crucial moment, a massive hand suddenly pushed its way through the mending rift. This sight was similar to the descent of the deity, which he had witnessed previously during the fight against Sovereign Chen Ling Hu. The hand flicked its wrist lightly, and ancient sage Yang Qing was suddenly slammed into the ground, halting the transfusion of blood. Pu. 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 At the same time, the ancient sages who were supplying ancient sage Yang Qing with their strength spurted blood under the backlash and collapsed to the ground as well. A dimension shatterer realm expert. Zhong Xian's face darkened. The owner of this hand was clearly stronger than the deity whom he had killed with his golden page back then. Even without an altar on their side to establish a connection, he was able to breach the dimension barrier and tear open a passageway with brute force. Could it be that the void was the passageway to the azure that he had been looking for all along? With such doubts in his mind, the hand in the sky began thrashing around, causing the reinforced formation to weaken, such that it was beginning to falter. We need to stop him. Caught off guard by the abrupt turn of events, ancient sage Yang Qing roared anxiously as he swiftly kicked off into the air. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled a saber in his hand down upon the thrashing hand. He knew that if he wanted to sustain the formation, it would be of paramount importance to sever the hand, or else anything they did would be swiftly unraveled by it. Humph! Sensing ancient sage Yang Qing's aggression, the owner of the hand opened up his palm and pinched his fingers together lightly. The saber from ancient sage Yang Qing was caught precisely in between his fingers. As if a pair of unyielding pincers, no matter how ancient sage Yang Qing tugged, he was unable to retrieve his saber. We need to move together. Knowing the severity of the matter, the other ancient sages quickly flitted forth. With their combined might, many rifts swiftly formed around the already unstable space in the area. Several bundles of black flames descended from the void, raising an inferno around the area. Yang Shui, release me. Otherwise, all of us will die here. Kong Shiyaro yelled out desperately at the young man beside her. Yang Shui's face warped in hesitation as he struggled with the conflict in his mind. What are you hesitating over? Hesitate any longer and our tens of thousands of years of heritage will be destroyed. Kong Shiyaro roared wrathfully upon seeing that Yang Shui was still hesitating. All right. Knowing how dangerous the situation was, Yang Shui quickly tapped his finger on the seal trapping Kong Shiyaro and released it. While Yang Shui's cultivation was only at sempiternal realm consummation, he shared the same power origin as ancient sage Yang Qing, so it was much easier to unravel it. It did not take long for the seal around Kong Shiyaro to dissipate entirely. Humph! With a ferocious cry, Kong Xiao's eyebrows shot up as incredible energy swiftly built up within her. With a leap, she rose into the sky and whipped out a sword. Pointing the sword toward the hand, she brandished it with lightning speed. Remarkable! Zhong Xian nodded as he took this scene into sight. Just as he had thought, Kong Xiao's fighting prowess was formidable despite her young age. Just like him, her strength had also reached the blood reincarnation realm. The sword that she wielded in her hand was extremely powerful, too. It was stronger than the Dragonbone Divine Spear, and in Kong Xiao's grasp, it brought forth a might comparable to blood reincarnation realm consummation cultivators. Ding ding ding! Despite that, her sword qi only caused numerous sparks to rub off the hand. Nevertheless, she still continued to slash her sword relentlessly at the hand. Persistent cockroach! Seeing that a small fry from a lower dimension actually dared make a move against him, the owner of the hand bellowed angrily as he flicked his finger. Peng! Kong Shiyaro was knocked back by an incredible force, causing her back to crash heavily against the ground. Blood seeped down from the corners of her lips. There was simply too huge a gap between the blood reincarnation realm and the dimension shatterer realm. Back then, even when Zhong Xian coordinated with multiple blood reincarnation realm ancient sages, he had been no match for the deity summoned by sovereign Chen Ling Sai La. After flicking Kong Shiyaro back, the hand proceeded to flick its finger, creating a shockwave that kept ancient sage Yang Qing and the others at bay. With a piercing cry, the rift in the unstable space widened as yet another hand passed through it. Following which, a head came through as well. Just like the deity from before, this person was planning to make a forceful descent onto the master-teacher continent. Chapter 1891 Word of Law Boom. Along with the emergence of the head, the mercury-like power began to seep through the rift and diffuse into the surroundings. In response, Zhong Xian hurriedly sealed his acupoints, not daring to absorb any of it at all. Similar to the zhunqi of slaughter, this mercury-like energy was a special type of energy that could potentially crush one's meridians, causing one's cultivation to fall sharply or even put one in severe danger. We need to kill him right now. Seeing that the deity had managed to push his head through the rift, the complexions of ancient sage Yang Qing and the others darkened. With a furious roar, they swiftly charged toward the figure climbing out from the void. All kinds of energy sweeping around the area caused the formation to shake non-stop. Piece after piece of space crumbled to the ground. With just a flick of his finger, the deity fended off everyone's attack. At the same time, he used his other hand to push himself out from the rift, and it did not take long for his entire shoulder to come into appearance. It was as if he was dealing with mere ants. Despite having to fend off the simultaneous assault of numerous ancient sages, he had strength spare to push himself through the dimension barrier. From that alone, it was certain that the deity was much stronger than that fellow whom he had killed with the golden page. We won't be able to stop him at this rate. Kong Shiyaro spat through gritted teeth. She had already launched several hundred slashes, such that her zhunqi was on the verge of drying up, but she was unable to inflict any damage at all. Grinding her teeth, she turned to ancient sage Yang Qing and said in a resounding voice, "Don't waste your strength on attacking anymore. Use your strength to pull ancient sage Zi Yuan's body here instead." This. As if having figured out what Kong Shiyaro was going to do, ancient sage Yang Qing shook his head instinctively. Ancient sage Yang Qing, there's no other way around it. If we waste any more time, we'll all lose our lives here. Kong Shiyaro berated. If that fellow climbed through the dimension barrier and descended to their world, they would all be slaughtered. At the same time, the 100 schools of philosophers would face a calamity of unprecedented proportions, and it would not be long before the devastation spread to the master-teacher continent. If they wished to overcome the current crisis, they needed the resolve to put their lives on the line. But, you are the only one among Kong Shi's offspring to have a bloodline purity of over 8. You are the future of our 100 schools of philosophers, ancient sage Yang Qing said anxiously. If Kong Shiyaro did what she was thinking of, There was a good chance that she would lose her life. He was already old, so his death was inconsequential to the 100 schools of philosophers. However, the young lady was the descendant who had inherited the purest bloodline of Kongsha in the past millennium. Furthermore, she had overcome 3 ancient sage ordeals to date. As long as she was given sufficient time, there was a good chance that she would become the first cultivator to reach the Dimension Shatterer realm since Kongsha's era. If he allowed her to die, he would not be able to face his predecessors even after his death. If that fellow succeeds, all of us will lose our lives here. What use will the purity of my bloodline be after all of us are dead? Kongsha Yarrow exclaimed. She took a deep breath before spurting out a mouthful of blood. Boom! As soon as she spat out the mouthful of blood, it immediately burst into flames in the air. In an instant, it seemed as if the surrounding time had been halted. Even the deity who was climbing out from the rift came to a halt. It was as if someone had struck the stop button. After spurting out the mouthful of blood, Kong Xiao's face grew significantly paler. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as she looked at the coffin floating not too far away and commanded, "Come here." Wang. Hearing the order, the coffin slowly made its way over to Kongsha Yarrow amid a light rumbling sound. This is impartation of heaven's will? Zhong Xian was surprised. This was the ability that Kongsha Yarrow had activated through her bloodline. All along, he had been wondering what the bloodline ability of those of Kongsha's lineage was, but who would have thought that it was impartation of heaven's will? Was this not a little too simple? Compared to the Zhong clan's time acceleration and the Luo clan's spatial seal, was impartation of heaven's will not a little too lackluster in comparison? This did not seem to match up to Kongsha's incredible strength. This isn't right. Zhong Xian frowned as he activated his eye of insight to take a closer look. What he saw made his heart jolt in astonishment. This isn't impartation of heaven's will but impartation of heaven's will required one to impart knowledge that was acknowledged by the heavens in order to induce cultivators to heed their commands. While the heart of teacher comprehended by Zhong Xian allowed him to command plants and artifacts too, these beings needed to possess spirit or be enchanted with one. To put it in other words, impartation of heavens will only worked on those who possessed spirit and were able to cultivate, and it required one to lecture on a cultivation technique that was suited for that individual's cultivation. It was easier said than done. For example, if Zhong Xian wanted to influence someone through impartation of heaven's will, his soul depth would have to exceed the other party's, and the content of his lecture needed to spark inspiration in the other party. As formidable as Kongsha Yarrow seemed, her true cultivation was only at sempiternal realm consummation. Even if her soul depth had reached the level of an ancient sage, it still should not have been possible for her to make a lifeless coffin and corpse to heed her orders. This is word of law. Zhong Xian widened his eyes in astonishment. Word of law was an ability that turned one's diction into laws of the world, compelling the elements of the world to obey one's command. On the surface, it might seem similar to impartation of heaven's will, but it was much more terrifying than that. Before the word of law, all temporal laws and spatial laws meant nothing at all. Even if he activated the Zhong clan's bloodline, all the young lady had to do was to utter the word stop, and his movements would come to a complete halt. This was not a manipulation of time or space but the very elements of the world. The act of stopping would become a new law of the world, forcing one to abide by it. This was how terrifying the ability was. To think that this was the ability that Kongsha had comprehended during his breakthrough to ancient sage. It was no wonder he had boasted such incredible strength. Hong Long. Meanwhile, Kongsha Yarrow flew over to the coffin and opened it. Ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse swiftly flew out and floated in the air. Even though his eyes were tightly shut, the pulsations of energy that were coming from him made it seem as though he was alive. Pu. After doing all of this, Kongsha Yarrow spurted another mouthful of blood as her face turned even paler. Her body shuddered a little as it seemed to reach its limits. As powerful as the word of law was, her cultivation was still too low. Forcefully activating ancient sage Zi Yuan's body had caused too heavy a toll on her, damaging her foundations. Sighing deeply, ancient sage Yang Qing commanded, "Allow me." Boom. An incredible amount of blood gushed out from his body to surge into ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse. This caused the aura that ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse was emanating to swiftly grow stronger. Do you think that you can defeat me with a mere corpse? I really should snap you out of your daydreams, the deity sneered coldly as he thrust his palm downward. At that moment, his chest had also been pushed out through the dimension barrier as well. It seemed like it would not be long before he completely descended upon this world. The palm strike caused the surrounding space to swiftly compress together, forming something reminiscent of a black hole. Get him! With a ferocious cry, the remaining ancient sages rushed forward to meet the deity's palm. Hula! The incredible pressure sent shockwaves rippling into the surroundings. Before the ancient sages could react, their flesh had already been vaporized clean, leaving behind mere skeletons. Even so, they did not back down. They stood firmly in the air to stop the palm from landing on ancient sage Yang Qing and the others. Chapter 1892 His here, Peng Peng Peng. The ancient sages plopped heavily onto the ground, forming numerous craters on the elevated platform. Given their current cultivation, they would not die instantly even after they were reduced to bones. However, they had hibernated for far too long, and they had not fully recovered from the wounds that they had sustained during the encirclement of Sovereign Chen Yong. If they did not receive sufficient eon of ancient sage to replenish their vitality, their lifespan would swiftly dwindle, and they would die without doubt. In other words, they were really putting their lives on the line to stand against the deity. I can't allow those from the 100 schools of philosophers to die here. Zhongxian had not made a move thus far because his multiple unpleasant encounters with the 100 schools of philosophers in the past, and he had thought that they would be able to handle the situation by themselves. He had worried that his sudden intervention would only worsen the situation as the other ancient sages were bound to be wary of him. However, things were swiftly moving in the worst direction possible. He could not simply watch and leave those ancient sages of the 100 schools of philosophers to die. While he found their actions questionable, there was no doubt that they were protecting mankind in their own way, and they had made huge sacrifices for it. He could not simply watch as they lost their lives. Driving his energy, as he was just about to charge forth silently to inflict a fatal blow on the deity, Kong Shiyaro suddenly spurted another mouthful of blood before commanding, "Stabilize and push him back." Wang. Following her words, the rifts in the sky began to heal simultaneously as the space swiftly stabilized. At the same time, the deity whose waist was already out of the dimension barrier suddenly retreated hurriedly under the command, moving back to his shoulder. It was only unfortunate that her cultivation was simply too low compared to the deity's. Even after using her bloodline ability, she was still unable to push the deity back to the azure once and for all. It's indeed his bloodline. Wonderful. This is truly superb. With this, the clan head will surely accept me as his direct disciple and grant me endless resources. Even though he was nearly expelled from the world, the deity did not show the slightest hint of fear toward Kong Xiao's technique. Instead, his eyes glowed with frenzied excitement. At that moment, the corpse of ancient sage Zi Yuan also seemed to have absorbed sufficient blood and slowly rose out of the coffin. With clenched fists, he sent a punch right toward the deity climbing out from the rift. Boom! This fist was completely devoid of any elegance or flamboyance, but the might it carried was astonishing, reaching the level of a dimension-shatterer realm cultivator. Heh! In face of this devastating might, the deity did not show any trepidation. Instead, with a cold sneer, he placed his hands together. Sila. The formation sustained by ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse was forcefully ripped apart, causing the mercury-like energy to surge into the world. Under the sheer weight of the energy, ancient sage Yang Qing was crushed into the ground. As if there was a mountain weighing down on him, he was unable to move at all. The others were not faring too well either. As Kong Shiyaro had activated her bloodline ability, she was still able to somewhat hold her ground. On the other hand, Yang Shue's face paled as his skin swiftly ripped apart under the pressure, revealing his crimson flesh underneath. Zhongxian was also affected by the mercury-like energy too, but it was not too severe for him. He was the strongest among the ancient sages present, and he had sealed his acupoints beforehand to prevent any of that energy from getting into his body, so the damage that he sustained ended up being the least of all. Catcher, catcher, catcher. The deity fought with ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse, but with each blow executed, the strength that the corpse commanded dwindled. On the other hand, with the mercury-like energy suffusing the area, the deity seemed to be growing stronger by the moment. By the 8th blow, there was a resounding explosion as the corpse was sent flying back into the coffin. Bloodline ignition. With crimson eyes, Kong Xiao roared wrathfully as she began igniting her bloodline once more. But this time around, before she could finish her move, the deity sneered coldly, "Save your effort on this futile struggle. Just because I need you alive doesn't mean that I'll overlook your insolence." Following which, another palm strike descended from the rift. Pu. Kong Xiao's body immediately plummeted from the sky from the impact. Bearing the risk of his meridians ripping apart, Yang Shui forcefully drove his zhenqi to catch her. Ha ha ha. After knocking back ancient sage Zi Yuan's corpse and striking down Kong Xiao, the deity laughed heartily as he finally pushed himself out of the rift and floated in the air with his hands crossed triumphantly before his chest. The reason he had been troubled climbing out of the dimension barrier earlier was due to the formation obstructing his path. However, with the formation swiftly crumbling under the influx of the mercury-like energy, there was no longer anything that could stop him. I was curious as to what kind of environment could give birth to such an overpowered individual, but I must say that I'm very disappointed by what I'm seeing here, the deity sneered coldly as he reached out to grab Kong Xiao. Alarmed, Yang Shui rushed forward to pull Kong Xiao back, but he was sent flying with a simple flick of a finger. He crashed onto the ground, and the bones in his body shattered from the impact. "You're coming with me," the deity commanded. Hula. He wrapped Kong Xiao with a membrane of energy, trapping her. No. Seeing how the only descendant of Kong Shi to possess a bloodline purity of 8 over the past 1,000 years getting captured, everyone's eyes widened in horror. But with the huge disparity of power between them and the enemy, there was nothing they could do. They had already tried everything that was at their disposal, but it was futile. Is the Kungsu domain that Kong Shi created going to be destroyed in my generation? How could I allow this to happen? Ancient sage Yang Qing trembled intensely as he shook his head in disbelief, unwilling to accept reality. Back then, even though Kong Shi had spared the otherworldly demonic tribe out of magnanimity, he had been convinced that mankind would only grow stronger with time and that they would be able to overcome any threats that came their way. However, not even the great Kong Shi had expected the eon of ancient sage to suddenly vanish from the world. This phenomenon had turned the tables around, and all of a sudden, mankind had been put in a precarious position once more. Even though they had successfully curbed the threat of the otherworldly demonic tribe, mankind was still unable to return to its golden era. Had it been before the emergence of the Temple of Confucius, there would have been no way anyone would have been able to bypass the dimension barrier. However, with the destruction of the Temple of Confucius, the formation sealing the dimension barrier was growing weaker with each passing moment. Even if they expended all of their lifespans right now to augment the barrier, it would bring them nothing more than temporary relief. Would things have been any different if that man was there? At this moment, ancient sage Yang Qing could not help but think of the celestial master teacher known as Zhongxian. That fellow might have been young, but he had produced miracles time and time again. Based on what he knew, that fellow had managed to kill a deity that sovereign Chen Ling had summoned a deity through a ritual. If that fellow was with them, would he have been able to kill the deity before them? Would he have been able to save the 100 schools of philosophers from the impending crisis that was lying just ahead of them? These are all futile thoughts. He isn't here, and our relationship with him is poor. Ancient sage Yang Qing shook his head helplessly. Putting aside that there was no way outsiders would be able to get in there, even if that man was there, it was likely that he would be reluctant to help them. While they shared the common goal of freeing mankind from the threat of the otherworldly demonic tribe, their difference in values had caused several clashes between one another, resulting in the deterioration of their relations. Even if I lose my life today, I have to save Kong Xiao at any cost. She's the hope of the 100 schools of philosophers, so nothing bad can come to her. Knowing that it was meaningless to think about all that, ancient sage Yang Qing gathered the final dregs of his strength, hoping to launch a decisive attack that would at least buy Kong Shiyaro some time to make her escape. But at this moment, a cold glint suddenly flashed through the air. As swift as lightning, it darted right toward the deity's throat. This. Taken aback by the sudden emergence of such an expert, ancient sage Yang Qing was taken aback. He hurriedly took a closer look, and a lofty figure appeared in his sight. It was a sight that he would never be able to erase from his mind. It's Zhong Xian. He's here. Chapter 1893. Borrowing a sword. Ancient sage Yang Qing had thought that they were goners, but against all odds, the person whom they had a complicated relationship with, Zhong Xian, suddenly appeared at this moment and charged toward the deity without any hesitation. Looking at the splendid spearmanship that he might never be able to reach in his lifetime, ancient sage Yang Qing sighed deeply in embarrassment. I guess he's a greater master teacher than I'll ever be. For mankind, personal grudges are nothing to him at all. I wronged him. For mankind, the other party was willing to bear the criticism of the world and fake his own death so as to sneak into the midst of the otherworldly demonic tribe and quell the threat. This spoke volumes of his character. How could such a noble person possibly leave them in the lurch when crisis truly hit? While ancient sage Yang Qing was lamenting over his own misjudgment, Kong Shiyaro and the others were awestruck by Zhong Xian's attack. They were unable to find the words to describe how powerful that spear thrust was. It was perfectly aligned with nature, making the movements feel extremely smooth. In that instant, their pain and frailty seemed to have disappeared from their minds. The only thing that their attention was on was the beauty of the spear. The deity floating in the air was stunned as well. He did not think that there would be such a powerful adversary in this lower dimension. In his moment of hesitation, the spear had already arrived before his throat. Pooha! Fresh blood splattered as the spear pierced through his skin. However, barely after entering an inch, it was as if he had struck a metal plate. No matter how hard Zhong Xian pushed, he was unable to thrust his spear any deeper. I never would have thought that this scarce environment could give birth to an expert of your caliber. Not bad. Not bad at all. I'll take you along with me too. With a cold sneer, the deity grabbed the spear that was in his throat. In response, Zhong Xian swiftly flicked the spear, and it warped into a massive black dragon that wrapped itself tightly around the deity's body. Taken aback by this move, the deity was stunned for an instant before fury filled his mind. How could he, an expert from the Azure, possibly be trapped by a mere being from a lower dimension? This was an insult to him. You're asking for it. His muscles bulged out as he exerted his might in both of his arms. He was intending to crush the black dragon when a massive brick suddenly fell down from the sky and smacked him right in the face. Peng. Previously, Zhong Xian had forged the Golden Origin Cauldron into a sempiternal realm consummation artifact. Over the past month in the otherworldly demonic tribe, he had allowed it to absorb the eon of ancient sage inside the painting, and it did not take long before it managed to achieve a breakthrough to ancient sage realm. While it was still miles away from reaching the Dimension Shatterer realm, with its astounding weight and remarkably resilient material, it was still able to inflict some damage to the deity through a direct hit on his head. The direct hit rendered the deity momentarily dazed as a ringing sound persisted in his ear. Just as the deity was going to blow his top, the brick suddenly spoke up. Let me just clarify this in advance. I am not a brick but a cauldron. What struck your face was my bottom. Following which, the Golden Origin Cauldron did not forget to wiggle its bottom on the other party's face to emphasize its point. Kong Shiyaro and the others were stunned by what they had just seen. Why would such a powerful expert have such an underhanded and seemingly lewd artifact? Furthermore, that fellow actually said that it was a cauldron. The heck, do you even know what a cauldron is? You are obviously a brick. There's not a single part to you that looks like a cauldron at all. Or are we getting behind times? Feeling the cauldron rubbing its bottom on his face, the deity went berserk. Scram! Boom! A powerful shockwave burst forth from the deity, causing the Golden Origin Cauldron and the Dragonbone Divine Spear to be sent flying. The latter swiftly warped back into a spear before returning to Zhongxian's grasp. Dong. The furious deity landed a fist on the golden origin cauldron's body. My bottom, the golden origin cauldron yelped as it spun anxiously on the ground, as if trying to reshape its dented bottom. You be ****. I've changed my mind, I'm going to slaughter you. The face of the deity twitched a little as he glared at Zhongxian. Without any hesitation, he lifted his palm and thrust it down upon the latter. On the other hand, Zhongxian quickly activated the Zhong clan's bloodline and flitted several hundred meters away in an instant. Then, he brandished his spear and charged toward the deity once more. Time quintessence. Seeing how the young man seemingly teleported away to dodge his attack, the deity harumphed disdainfully. He raised his hand with the intention to wrap the young man in his energy so as to seal his movements, but clanging sounds suddenly echoed in the air above at that moment. Raising his head, he could not help but narrow his eyes in alarm. At some point, countless weapons had filled the sky, be it swords, sabers, hammers, spears. All in all, there were several hundred of them. Voila! Those weapons immediately descended to launch a flurry of attacks on the deity. Do you think that these trash weapons can hurt me? The deity scoffed in disdain. With a mere glance, he was able to tell that those weapons were all great sage artifacts. Not a single one of them had reached ancient sage. Putting aside defeating him, none of these weapons would even be able to pierce his skin. Well, I'm not banking on them hurting you either, Zhongxian replied nonchalantly. He had gathered those weapons from the otherworldly demons that he had killed back at the Temple of Confucius. Placed on the market, they were artifacts that were highly sought after by other cultivators, but they were insufficient to harm ordinary ancient sages, let alone those who were at the Dimension Shatterer realm. You aren't banking on them? The deity was slightly taken aback. He was unable to figure out what Zhongxian's intentions were. At this moment, the deity suddenly felt a coldness beneath him once more. Lowering his head, he saw the spear from earlier warping into a black dragon once more to trap him tightly, sealing his movements for a moment. You! The deity bellowed with gritted teeth. In the end, the attack from all of those weapons was just a distraction for the spear to trap him once more. But so what? Even if they had him trapped temporarily, there was nothing that they could do to him. As long as he exerted his full strength, he would be able to swiftly break free from his restraints. It would be interesting to see how many times this black dragon could do this before it was broken into pieces. While the spear had been tempered many times, its cultivation was still far beneath his. Each time it was jolted away, it would sustain significant damage. With his eye of discernment, he could tell that the spear could only do this for another 5 times at the very most. Just as he was about to knock the spear away once more, the young man suddenly lowered his head and said, "You are Kong Shiyao, right? Lend me your sword." "My sword." Kong Shiyao was stunned. Nevertheless, knowing how urgent the situation was, she did not hesitate to pass her sword over. Knowing that the young man was intending to use her sword in the battle, Kong Shiyao hurriedly said, "My sword is a treasure passed down within our Kong clan. Those who don't possess our bloodline won't be able to assimilate it. If you wish to use it, I can lend you a droplet of my blood." This sword had been forged by one of the best blacksmiths in the 100 schools of philosophers. The sword had already reached blood reincarnation realm consummation, a mere step away from reaching the Dimension Shatterer realm. Those who did not possess a sufficiently pure bloodline would not even be able to move the sword. It had taken her nearly 3 years before she was able to assimilate the sword and use a portion of its prowess. If the young man before her wished to use it, he would need to use her blood as a medium to temporarily tame the sword. "We don't have time for that now," Zhongxian replied as he flicked his wrist powerfully. Wang! A crisp sound echoed by the sword, and the next moment, it bowed down before Zhongxian, almost like a loyal, domesticated dog. "You've already tamed it?" Kong Xiao's mouth widened in disbelief. Chapter 1894. His Zhongxian. With Zhongxian's capabilities, taming a blood reincarnation realm consummation sword was a piece of cake. After assimilating the sword, He raised it high in the air and hacked it down upon the trapped deity. Dang! There was a resounding clang as sparks rubbed off the top of the deity's head. A layer of skin fell to the ground. The eyes of the deity turned scarlet with rage. On the other hand, Kong Shiaro widened her eyes as she muttered incredulously, "That's not how you are supposed to use a sword. The greatest strength of a sword lay in its swiftness, but that fellow actually used it as a hacking tool instead. Even the best of weapon would eventually spoil under such misuse." Dang dang dang. In a single breath, Zhongxian executed over 100 hacks all on the same spot, causing a laceration to appear on the deity's skull. It was so deep that one could almost see his brain. Boom! Overflowing with the rage from being humiliated, the deity released a massive outburst of power once more and sent the dragonbone divine spear flying. He turned to Zhongxian, intending to slaughter that arrogant young man who dared lay his hands on him, when a brick suddenly fell on his face once more. This time, the brick descended upon the laceration on his head, causing blood to spurt out like a fountain. The heck? The deity nearly lost his mind. That fellow's fighting style was really the epitome of underhandedness and despicableness. We are all top-notch experts. Shouldn't you show some honor in your fighting style? We should be crossing swords valiantly with one another instead of throwing out everything at our disposal as though we are mere ruffians. Your image is crumbling, you know. Infuriated, the deity shook off the brick and turned his gaze once more toward Zhongxian, only to see that the latter had fled far away using his bloodline ability. Trembling with rage, the deity turned his sights to ancient sage Yang Qing and the others and bellowed, "Since you wish to play games with me, I'll start by slaughtering the lot of them." He needed Kong Shiyaro alive for his own purposes, but as for the other ancient sages, their lives meant nothing to him at all. Thus, the deity thrust his palm downward, but once again, before his palm could connect, a spear suddenly stood in its path and halted its movements. Zhongxian stood right before the deity and wagged his finger provocatively. "Preying on the weak, what a formidable person you are. But I guess there's no other choice, considering that there's nothing you can do about me." Voila! With a wave of his hand, Zhongxian sent another barrage of weapons flying toward the deity. What cheap taunts! But very well, I shall start with you then. With a cold glint in his eyes, the deity began dashing forth. His movements were not too fast, but every step that he took caused a tremendous pulsation of energy that collapsed the space in the surroundings, rendering it impossible for others to traverse across wherever he had been through. He had to admit that his speed was lacking in comparison to Zhongxian, but as long as he shattered the space in the surroundings, the latter would have nowhere to escape to. What a distasteful move! Zhongxian's lips twitched. He turned to ancient sage Yang Qing and the others and said, "You lot should make use of this opportunity to recuperate and heal up. I'll handle him for the time being." Following which, he began flitting away into the distance once more. On the other hand, seeing that Zhongxian was fleeing into the distance once again, the deity glanced at Kong Shiyao, intending on making use of this opportunity to capture her once more. However, as if having read his mind, Zhongxian suddenly turned around and launched a counterattack. The brick, sword, and spear all flew right toward him, prepared to slip in through the cracks of his defense at any moment to harass him. At the same time, several corpses flew over and exploded right in his face. Finally, the deity reached the limits of his patience and began chasing Zhongxian like a crazed dog. As long as that fellow remained alive, it would only be a matter of time before he was driven insane by the other party. It seemed like he would really have to get rid of that fellow first. Boom boom boom. Just like that, the two of them began on a seemingly endless chase. From time to time, the one fleeing would turn around and launch a couple of attacks before fleeing once more, leaving the one chasing more enraged than ever. The battle between the two of them caused the whole of the Kungsu domain to rattle ceaselessly. Peng! Yet another scholastic master was sent flying. Standing on the spot, Fan Xiaoshu scanned his surroundings with a forlorn look on his face, reminiscent of an expert lamenting the lack of a rival in the world. "Is there anyone else who wants to test my strength?" Mi Xian and the others were the first few who had rushed over to welcome the freshman, so there were still a couple of scholastic masters who were not there yet. Upon hearing that a powerful freshman had arrived at the academy, they swiftly made their way over, suppressed their cultivation, and challenged the other party to a battle. To their dismay, they found that none of them were able to survive a single blow from the other party. More importantly, Fan Xiaoshu seemed to be further refining his skills over the course of the battle, causing his fighting prowess to swiftly grow. By now, there was no one who could match him in his cultivation realm. In fact, even those a realm stronger than him were no match for him. There's no need for that. It'll be meaningless to continue the battles at this point. Zhongqing shook his head and sighed deeply. The result could not have been any clearer. None of them was a match for Fan Xiaoshu. Fan Xiaoshu scanned the crowd around him and asked, "Then, who should I choose as my teacher?" While he had defeated all of these scholastic masters, it still did not change the fact that he was only a Saint Ninden freshman and needed a teacher to guide him around. "I'm unqualified for the role. I don't think that I have the ability to become your teacher." The defeated crowd lowered their faces in embarrassment. They would have loved more than anything to accept a powerful student as their direct disciple, but considering how they could not even defeat the young man, what right did they have to teach him? Anyone whom Fan Xiaoshu laid his eyes on would swiftly avert their gaze awkwardly. Some time passed, but not a single person spoke up. The surroundings were as silent as a graveyard. Expecting such an outcome to his words, Fan Xiaoshu finally spoke up with a smile on his face. "Actually, I already have a teacher in mind, but I'm not sure if I will be able to come under his tutelage." Seeing a ray of hope to free themselves from this awkward situation, the scholastic masters in the area quickly asked, "May I know who it is?" At this point in time, they would do anything to get out of this terribly uncomfortable situation. "He goes by the name of Zhong Xian. However, I'm not too sure whether that is his real name or not," Fan Xiaoshu replied. "Zhong Xian? Is there anyone in the great frontistery of Confucianism who goes by the surname of Zhong?" Zhongqing was startled. Those in the great frontistery of Confucianism all came from the lineage of the 100 schools of philosophers, so how could there be a Zhong around? Nangong Yuanfeng suddenly stepped forward and said, "That name sounds rather familiar. I do know of a Zhong Xian in this world, but I'm not sure if we are referring to the same person." While not many in the Kungsu domain would have heard of Zhong Xian, that name was practically a household name on the master-teacher continent. Zhongqing and Fan Xiaoshu quickly turned their curious gazes over. This man isn't from the 100 schools of philosophers. Instead, he's a powerful master-teacher from the master-teacher continent, as well as the head of the Zhong clan. The reason we failed to acquire the celestial amulets of legacy back then as per the requirements of our mission was due to his interference, Nangong Yuanfeng said. "Ah, that Zhong Xian?" Zhongqing widened his eyes in realization. The top echelons of the 100 schools of philosophers had already heard about the happenings in the Temple of Confucius. Based on the information that they had received, almost everything that they had sought to obtain, be it the canvas of 4 seasons or the body fruit, had ended up getting stolen by him. "How did you hear of his name?" Zhongqing stared at the young man before him intently. It was deeply suspicious how Fan Xiaoshu knew of Zhong Xian's name even though he had spent his entire life in the Kungsu domain. There was likely something deeper to this. Fan Xiaoshu's body suddenly stiffened as he realized that he had just let something important slip. All along, he had thought that Zhong Xian was an ancient sage of the great frontistery of Confucianism or at least someone who was close to the academy. But contrary to his expectations, it turned out that the other party was not even from the 100 schools of philosophers. That would explain why the other party had borrowed his identity in order to get in. He had really messed up. "You've never left the Kungsu domain before, so you shouldn't have known of that name. Does this mean that Zhong Xian is currently in the Kungsu domain?" Zhongqing's eyebrows shot up as a bad premonition struck his mind. Considering how Fan Xiaoshu and the others had suddenly grown so much stronger, as well as the fact that they actually knew of Zhong Xian's name, the most logical deduction that he could think of was that the renowned master-teacher of the master-teacher continent had somehow managed to find his way into the Kungsu domain. That Fan Xiaoshu was in a quandary. He had no idea how he should respond in such a situation, but it turned out that he did not have to. A split moment later, a deafening rumbling echoed in the air, and the clear sky began to collapse into a void. Everyone hurriedly raised their heads in alarm, only to see two figures fighting one another in the air. Each time they clashed with one another, a gorge formed in the sky that extended over several li. Lightning rained down so furiously that it seemed as if the world would soon collapse under the devastation. "Who the hell are you?" A person with blood dripping down his head bellowed with gritted teeth. "Your grandfather, Zhong Xian." The other person replied gleefully. "His Zhong Xian." Everyone was stunned. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.